Margaret and Harold, a retired couple, face a family crisis as their grandson Jason repeatedly asks for money, straining their relationship. When they shift financial support to education only, tensions escalate. Rebecca, their daughter, and Jason react with anger, spreading rumors and even attempting fraud to access supposed inheritance. Meanwhile, granddaughter Megan begins to see through her family's entitlement, choosing independence and education. As the conflict deepens with public accusations and a forged loan, a family medical emergency reveals stark priorities. Will Margaret and Harold's boundaries hold, or will their family fracture irreparably? If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales. Your support means the world to us. Click the bell icon to stay updated, and don't miss tomorrow's special story. Share with friends and join our community today. The instant Jason's name flashed across my phone screen, a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. It wasn't a special occasion, no birthday, no holiday, not even a lazy Sunday when families typically catch up. It was the third Tuesday of the month, the day his rent was due, and I knew exactly what this call was about. When I answered, his voice burst through with that forced cheerfulness that always made my heart sink a little deeper. "Grandma, how's it going? How's Grandpa doing with his new meds?" Despite the predictability, I couldn't help but smile. At 72, I'd grown used to that particular tone, the one that danced around the real reason for calling, the one I'd heard countless times during my 40 years as a high school principal when students begged for deadline extensions. It was the sound of someone building up to ask for something they knew they shouldn't. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one by the window overlooking the lake, and responded warmly. "We're both doing fine, Jason. Your grandpa's out fishing with Mr. Peterson from down the street. You know how he loves those quiet mornings on the water." I could picture Harold out there, his old flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, casting his line with the same patient focus he'd always had. Jason's enthusiasm perked up at the news, but I caught the subtle shift in his voice, the clearing of his throat, the telltale pause. I waited, giving him the space to get to the point, though I already knew what was coming. "So, Grandma," he began, his words tumbling out with a rehearsed excitement, "I've got this incredible opportunity." There it was, not "I miss you" or "I'd love to come visit," just another request thinly dressed up as something grand. This time it was for new recording equipment, supposedly critical for his big break in music. Last month it had been rent money after he'd blown his budget on concert tickets. The month before that, car repairs that somehow cost exactly $1,000. As he launched into his pitch, I found my gaze drifting to the family photo on the mantle, taken just 5 years ago at Harold's and my 70th birthday celebration. Jason had his arms slung around his sister Megan, both of them grinning wide, their eyes bright with what I thought was genuine affection. Back then, their visits didn't come with price tags. Back then, they called just to talk, to share stories, to laugh over old memories. I hadn't always been so cynical about their motives. There was a time when Jason and Megan were the light of my world, when Harold and I would drop everything to drive 3 hours from our lakeside home to their suburban Chicago lives for school plays or soccer games. Those were the days when their smiles felt like payment enough. Harold and I had built our life on careful choices. As a high school principal, I'd spent decades shaping young minds, while Harold, an engineer at the local manufacturing plant, had poured his precision into every project. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable thanks to years of diligent saving. After retirement, we'd bought our lakehouse, a dream we'd nurtured through countless late-night conversations. I'd always imagined waking up to the mist rolling off the water, spending evenings watching herons glide through the shallows. And we did. But as I listened to Jason's latest pitch, I couldn't shake Harold's voice in my head, his gentle chiding from years past. "Margaret, they're adults now. They need to learn financial responsibility." I'd always brushed him off, insisting they were just starting out, that we'd had help when we were young too. But deep down, I knew he was right. My generosity came from love, but it was starting to feel like something else, something heavier. Raising our daughter Rebecca and watching her build her own family had always been a complicated dance. Her husband David's architectural firm took off when Jason and Megan were young, and suddenly their lives were filled with designer clothes, European vacations, and a kind of extravagance I'd never known. Rebecca, always competitive with her neighbors, leaned into it fully. I tried to warn her gently about teaching the kids the value of money, but she'd laugh it off. "Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with that dismissive confidence, "we work hard so they don't have to struggle like we did. What's the point of success if you can't give your kids the best?" Her version of struggle was a fiction, though. Rebecca had grown up in a comfortable middle-class home with everything she needed and most of what she wanted. Harold and I had paid for her college, but she'd worked summer jobs for her spending money. Somehow, in her retelling, that had morphed into a tale of hardship she'd overcome. By contrast, my son Michael and his wife Claire took a different path with their children, Emma and Ben. Michael, a high school teacher, and Claire, a nurse, lived in a modest home just blocks from us in Lakeside. Their house was filled with warmth. Fewer luxuries, but more laughter. Fewer gadgets, but more conversation. Emma and Ben worked part-time jobs through high school, applied for scholarships, and studied late into the night. They still found time to visit us weekly, often bringing homemade cookies or offering to help Harold with yard work. Those visits weren't about needing something. They came because they wanted to, because they valued the time we spent together. The difference was stark, and it stung. The first time Jason asked for money was during his sophomore year of college. He'd maxed out his credit card and was too ashamed to tell his parents. "Just this once, Grandma," he'd said, his voice trembling with what I'd hoped was genuine regret. "I messed up my budget, and I don't want Dad to know." I sent $800 without hesitation, believing it was a one-time mistake, a chance to help him learn without facing his parents' judgment. Grandparents were supposed to be the soft landing, weren't they? 2 months later, Megan called with a similar story, an unexpected car repair that left her short on rent. "Dad would kill me if he knew I didn't have enough in savings," she'd said, her voice laced with urgency. Again, I sent the money. Harold raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. I told myself it was what family did, but those one-time requests became a pattern. Emergency funds turned into spring break trips, security deposits, and even daily expenses when they'd overspent their parents' allowances. Their calls and texts came in waves, always tied to a need, followed by long stretches of silence. Birthday cards arrived late, if they came at all. Invitations to their events were last minute, often too late for us to make the trip. Yet when money was involved, their timing was impeccable. Each request chipped away at the warmth I'd once felt, replacing it with a quiet ache I didn't want to name. The moment of clarity came 3 years ago on a crisp October morning, our 50th wedding anniversary. Harold and I had planned a small celebration at the Hearth, the cozy lakeside coffee shop where we'd had our first date all those years ago. Michael and Claire arrived early, bringing Emma and Ben, who'd come home from college for the weekend. They decorated the private room with golden balloons and set out framed photos from our marriage, each one a snapshot of a life built together. My heart swelled at their thoughtfulness, tears pricking my eyes as I traced the edges of those memories. The party was set for noon, but by 12:30, Rebecca and David rushed in, full of excuses about traffic and work emergencies. When I asked about Jason and Megan, Rebecca waved it off. "They couldn't make it," she said lightly. "Jason's got a gig tonight, and Megan's at a sorority event. They send their love." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment, but Harold's hand found mine under the table, his silent support steadying me. Later that evening, as we sifted through cards and gifts on our back porch, the lake shimmering under the moonlight, a text from Jason lit up my phone. "Happy anniversary, Grandma. Sorry I couldn't be there. About to go on stage. BTW, could you help me out with my car insurance? It's due tomorrow, and I'm a little short, about $300. No card, no call, just a request tacked onto a message that felt like an afterthought. The words hit like a punch, and for the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of it. "They only call when they need money," I whispered, the truth settling into my chest like a stone. Harold didn't argue. He just took my hand and said, "You've been generous to a fault, Margaret. Maybe it's time to be generous in a different way." I didn't fully grasp what he meant, but the next morning brought a new perspective. Emma called, her voice bright with excitement. "Grandma, I got accepted into the research program I told you about, the one that'll help me get into medical school." Before I could congratulate her, She rushed on, her words bubbling with gratitude. I just wanted to share it with you because you've always believed in me. No request, no agenda, just a granddaughter wanting to share her joy. As I hung up, I felt a shift inside me, a clarity I hadn't known I needed. My generosity had always come from love, but perhaps Harold was right. Maybe it was time to give in a way that nurtured connection, not dependence. On a quiet Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a familiar name lighting up the screen. Professor Harmon. His voice carried a mix of determination and vulnerability as he spoke. It's a long shot, he began hesitating, but I was wondering if you might have some time this weekend to help me practice my presentation skills. He went on to explain that while his research was rock solid, his public speaking needed work, not for lack of knowledge, but for the confidence to share it effectively. His words revealed a man who thrived in the lab but felt exposed under the spotlight, yearning to bridge that gap. A warmth bloomed in my chest at the thought of helping him. Of course, I replied, my voice soft with affection. Why don't you come over for lunch on Saturday? Grandpa makes a mean grilled cheese, and we can work on your presentation afterward. The invitation felt like more than a casual offer. It was a chance to connect, to share a moment of growth. His response was immediate, laced with gratitude. Really? That would be amazing. Can I bring Ben too? He's home this weekend and was just saying how much he misses Grandpa's stories about engineering. The excitement in his voice painted a picture of a young man eager to reconnect with family, to soak in the wisdom woven into Grandpa's tales of gears and blueprints. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, my fingers tracing the edges of my phone as a new idea began to take root. Professor Harmon's words lingered in my mind, stirring something deeper. His focus on growth over material gain felt like a quiet nudge, a reminder that generosity could take many forms. I thought of my grandson Jason, whose frequent calls for money had become a painful pattern. His latest request came later that day, his voice tight with urgency. He'd been evicted from his apartment and needed a deposit for a new one. Grandma, I'll be homeless if I don't get this by Friday, he pleaded, the weight of his words pressing against my heart. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Jason, I said gently, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. I can't send you the money this time. The shock in his silence was almost tangible, a sharp contrast to the warmth I'd felt earlier. What? He finally said, disbelief crackling through the line. I could feel his frustration, his fear of being untethered, but I pressed on, my resolve hardening like clay in a kiln. Your grandfather and I have made a decision. We're redirecting our financial help toward education costs for all our grandchildren. If you want to go back to school, we'd be happy to cover tuition or books. His response was sharp, edged with hurt. That's not fair. You know music is my thing, not college. I don't need more school. I need a place to live. My stomach nodded at his words, the image of the little boy who once clung to my hand flashing through my mind. I understand you're upset, I said, keeping my tone even, despite the ache in my chest. Your parents can help with the apartment if they choose. Our support is focused on education now. The call ended with a tense silence, followed by a muttered, I guess I'll figure it out myself, before the line went dead. My hands shook as I set the phone down, the weight of his anger settling over me like a heavy funnel. I longed for the easy connection we'd shared when he was younger, when our bond wasn't tangled in financial requests. But I knew enabling his cycle of crises wasn't helping him. Or us. Later that evening, Harold found me on the porch, staring at the lake's glassy surface, its stillness mirroring the turmoil in my heart. He settled into the chair beside me, his presence a quiet anchor. You did the right thing, he said, his voice steady but kind. I turned to him, my eyes stinging. Then why does it feel so terrible? He reached for my hand, his touch warm and grounding. Because setting boundaries with people we love is one of the hardest things we'll ever do, he said softly. But sometimes it's the most important. His words didn't erase the pain, but they gave it context, a reminder that love sometimes meant saying no. The following week, Emma and Ben came over for Sunday dinner, their familiar laughter filling the house with life. As we cleared the dishes, Emma's voice grew heavy. Medical school is going to be so expensive. she sighed, her eyes clouded with worry. I'm picking up extra shifts at the cafe, but with my course load, there just aren't enough hours. Ben nodded, his own exhaustion evident. The engineering program's killing me too. I'm thinking of dropping a research position to work more at the tech repair shop. Their words carried the weight of ambition tempered by practicality, a struggle I recognized all too well. Harold caught my eye across the table, and I knew we were aligned. Your grandfather and I have been discussing something, I began, choosing my words carefully. We've decided to set up education funds for all our grandchildren. We'd like to help with your tuition and books. The room seemed to pause, the air thick with their surprise. Emma's eyes welled with tears, her hands trembling as she set down a plate. Are you serious? She whispered. Grandma, that would change everything. I could take that unpaid research position. It's an incredible experience for med school. Ben, usually so reserved, looked like he might topple over. But it's so much money, he said, his voice thick with concern. Are you sure you can afford it? Harold chuckled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. We've lived simply and saved carefully. Helping you all get an education is exactly what we want to do with those savings. I added, there's just one condition. This isn't a blank check. We want to be part of your journey, updates on your classes, your professors, what you're learning, and Sunday dinners whenever you're in town. Emma laughed through her tears, her smile radiant. That's not a condition. That's a bonus. That night, I sat at my desk drafting 2 emails, one to Rebecca, one to Michael, explaining our decision to fund education for all 4 grandchildren. I made it clear that our support would cover tuition, books, and essential academic expenses, not apartments or recording equipment. Rebecca's response came the next morning, her voice sharp with indignation over the phone. Mom, what is this? Jason says you refused to help with his apartment deposit, but now you're throwing money at Emma and Ben for college. How is that fair? Her words stung, each one a reminder of the rift growing in our family. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The offer is the same for all 4 grandchildren, Rebecca. We're happy to help Jason if he pursues education, community college, trade school, whatever he chooses. But we're not funding monthly emergencies anymore. Her tone grew colder. This is about control. You've never approved of Jason's music career. The accusation cut deep, but I kept my voice gentle. It's not about approval. It's about investing in their futures in a way that fosters growth and responsibility. She ended the call abruptly, leaving a chill in its wake. Jason's communication dwindled to nothing, and Megan's occasional texts were addressed only to Harold, each one a small rejection that pierced my heart. Had I miscalculated? Was I fracturing my family beyond repair? Yet, amidst the silence, there were glimmers of hope. Emma called one evening, her voice bubbling with excitement as she described a complex procedure she'd observed during her hospital shadowing. Ben stopped by with a programming problem, his enthusiasm for his work infectious. These moments, built on mutual respect and shared passion, reminded me why we'd made this choice. Our relationships with them felt alive, grounded in something deeper than financial dependence. 3 months later, an unexpected email from Megan arrived. The subject line simply reading, "Coffee?" We met at the hearth the next day, and she looked different, subdued, her usual polished appearance softened by loose hair and a simple sweater. Thanks for meeting me, Grandma, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Her fingers fidgeted with her latte, her eyes searching for words. I've been thinking about what you said about education, she began, her voice tentative. At first, I was so mad. It felt like you were judging my choices. My heart ached at her words, but I stayed quiet, letting her continue. I know now that wasn't your intention. The thing is, I hate my major. Fashion marketing, it's not me. I chose it because it seemed glamorous, and Dad said it had good job prospects. Her admission caught me off guard. Megan had always seemed so confident in her path. What would you study if you could choose anything? I asked, leaning forward. Her eyes sparked with a light I hadn't seen in years. Early childhood education. I've been volunteering at a preschool for my community service credits, and Grandma, I love it. The kids are incredible, and watching them learn, it makes me so happy. Her words stirred memories of my own path into education, the joy of seeing young minds light up. That's wonderful, Megan, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But Dad says teachers don't make money, and with my lifestyle, she gestured at her designer purse, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Lifestyles can change, I offered gently. Fulfilling work brings a different kind of richness. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's why I wanted to talk. I'm thinking of changing my major. It might mean an extra year or two of school. Dad's furious. He says he won't pay for more than 4 years. I'm wondering if your education offer would cover a 5th year. She paused, then it surprised me. And it's not just about the money. I want to know if you'll support me. Dad's pressuring me to stick with the plan. Mom always backs him up, and Jason thinks I'm crazy to give up fashion industry connections. I reached across the table, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Of course I'll support you, I said, my voice steady with conviction. If teaching is your passion, you should pursue it. For the first time in months, I saw her smile. A real, unguarded smile that reminded me of the little girl who used to beg for one more story at bedtime. In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope that our family could find its way back to each other, one honest conversation at a time. For years, I'd watched my grandchildren drift through their lives, each grappling with their own dreams and struggles, and it tore at my heart. When I saw tears shimmering in Megan's eyes that day, it wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a crack in the wall that had grown between us. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and vulnerability. That moment wasn't just a conversation. It was a lifeline, a fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been lost. It wasn't a grand epiphany or a sudden fix for years of strained connections, but it was a beginning, a small, tender step towards something better. Megan started coming by the lakehouse more often after that, especially on weekends when she returned home from college. She'd settle on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes tracing the ripples on the lake as we talked. These weren't the hurried, need-driven exchanges of the past, where she'd ask for help with rent or car repairs. No, these were real conversations about her studies, her dreams of becoming a teacher, the way she was starting to see the world through a lens of possibility rather than desperation. I could feel her softening, her guarded heart opening just a fraction, and it filled me with a cautious joy. Each visit felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a relationship we were both determined to rebuild. Jason was a different story, one that tested my patience and my resolve. His calls were still erratic, his texts often laced with subtle hints about his latest financial woes. Things are tight, he'd say, or the music scene's brutal right now, and I'd feel that familiar pang of guilt, the urge to fix it for him. But something had shifted in him too, even if it was harder to see. For his birthday, instead of the usual request for cash, he invited us to a small venue in Chicago where he was performing. Harold and I made the 3-hour drive, our hearts a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. We sat in the front row watching him pour his soul into songs I'd never heard before, raw, aching melodies that spoke of longing and resilience. After the show, he met us outside, his guitar slung over his shoulder, his face flushed with the adrenaline of performing. That last one was new, he admitted, almost shyly. I wrote it about growing up at the lakehouse. Remember how you used to take me fishing at sunrise, Grandpa? Harold's face softened, his eyes glistening with memories of those quiet mornings. Every Saturday in summer, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You were the only one patient enough to sit still in that boat, waiting for the fish to bite. Jason's gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the thoughtful, curious kid who'd ask 100 questions about the world. I miss those days, he said softly, and my heart ached with the weight of all the years that had slipped between us. As we drove home that night, Harold reached over and squeezed my hand, his grip steady and warm. You were right, he said, his voice quiet but certain. About what? I asked, glancing at him in the dim glow of the dashboard. About being generous in a different way, he replied. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is believe they can stand on their own 2 feet. His words settled over me like a blanket, warming the parts of me that had grown weary from worry. We'd made a choice to stop enabling, to redirect our support toward education and growth rather than quick fixes. And though it hadn't been easy, it was starting to bear fruit. 6 months later, the lake house was alive with the sound of all four grandchildren gathered together for the first time in years. The occasion was Emma's acceptance to medical school, a milestone that pulled everyone to the dock, their voices mingling with the lapping of the water. Emma was radiant, her excitement spilling over as she talked about her future in medicine, her hands animated as she described her dreams of helping others. Ben, ever the quiet engineer, shared details of his latest project, his voice steady but his eyes bright with pride. Megan spoke about her education classes, her passion for teaching evident in every word. And Jason, who so often dominated conversations with his own struggles, was actually listening, his head tilted, his expression open. Watching them, I felt a gratitude so deep it bordered on reverence. This was what I'd hoped for, not perfection, but connection, a family knitting itself back together. "How did it go with Jason yesterday?" Harold asked as we prepared lunch in the kitchen, the clatter of plates a comforting rhythm. Jason had asked to speak with me alone, and we'd spent an hour walking along the lake shore, the crunch of gravel under our feet punctuating our conversation. "He's enrolling in music business courses at the community college," I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "Says if he's going to make it as a musician, he needs to understand the industry better. Asked if our education offer still stands." Harold's smile was wide, unguarded. "And," he prompted. "I told him we'd cover the tuition and books, just like we promised," I said, my heart swelling at the thought of Jason taking this step. Through the kitchen window, I could see them all now, sitting on the bee, their feet dangling in the water, their laughter rising like music, their shoulders brushed, their heads bent together just like when they were children. And for a moment, time folded in on itself, blending past and present. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. Setting boundaries never is. There had been angry phone calls, hurt feelings, and silences that stretched on painfully. But watching them now, I knew with unshakable certainty that redirecting our support toward education, toward empowering them rather than enabling dependence, had been an act of profound love. Money could patch holes, but it couldn't build character or forge the kind of connection that came from trust and mutual respect. Sometimes the greatest gift we could give was the space for them to find their own way, with guidance and boundaries to light the path. They might not all become doctors or engineers or even graduate with perfect grades, but they were learning something far more valuable: self-reliance, purpose, and the knowledge that our love for them was about so much more than what we could provide financially. As I called them in for lunch, I realized this was the truest education of all. I thought our new approach would slowly mend the fractures in our family, that with time, Jason and Megan would come to see the value of our boundaries, maybe even cherish them. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. It was a crisp Sunday morning in early spring when Rebecca's call shattered the quiet. Her voice carried that forced brightness that always signaled a storm was brewing. "Mom, we need to talk about the kids' trust fund," she said, cutting straight to the point. Trust fund? The words caught me off guard, my mind scrambling. Harold and I had set up modest education funds for each grandchild when they were born, but those were far from what anyone would call a trust fund. "Don't play dumb, Mom," Rebecca snapped, her tone sharpening. "Dad mentioned years ago that you were planning to leave each grandchild a significant inheritance. The kids are counting on that money." My heart sank, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. Harold and I had discussed leaving portions of our estate to the grandchildren, but those were private conversations, never promises, never specifics. "Rebecca," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, "your father and I have made provisions in our will for all four grandchildren, but that's for the distant future. It's not something the kids should be counting on now." Her response was blunt, almost cold. "Jason needs his share now. He's starting a recording studio with some friends, and they need capital. He can't get a bank loan with his credit, and David and I aren't comfortable being the only ones investing in his future." The audacity of it stole my breath. Not just asking for money, but demanding an advance on an inheritance that wasn't even guaranteed. "That's not how inheritance works," I managed, my voice tight. "We're still very much alive and using our retirement savings to fund our retirement." Rebecca's tone grew insistent. "Mom, be reasonable. You're living in that big lake house with more space than you need. You could downsize and free up some capital for the kids. It's going to be their money eventually anyway. Indignation flared in my chest, hot and sharp. The lake house wasn't just a house. It was the dream Harold and I had built over decades. The sanctuary we'd earned through years of sacrifice. And now my own daughter was suggesting we sell it to fund Jason's latest venture? No, Rebecca, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. We're not advancing any inheritance to Jason. Our offer to help with education expenses stands for all 4 grandchildren. That's all. She pushed back, her voice rising. This studio is his education. It's his career training, just in a different form than the college track you're so fixated on. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. If Jason presents us with a legitimate business plan for a recording studio with educational purposes, teaching music, providing internships for students, we can discuss it. But from what you've described, this sounds like a commercial venture, not education. The line went silent, the kind of silence that carries weight. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was icy, deliberate. Fine, if that's how you want to play this, that's your choice. But don't be surprised if certain things come to light that you might prefer stayed private. My stomach twisted. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, alarm bells ringing in my head. Dad wasn't always the perfect husband, was he? She said, her tone laced with calculated casualness. Jason mentioned that Grandpa once told him about some trouble in your marriage back in the 80s. It'd be a shame if those old stories started circulating among the extended family. My blood ran cold. Harold and I had gone through a rough patch nearly 40 years ago, a brief separation we'd worked through in private, emerging stronger for it. It wasn't something we'd shared with our children, though I suppose Harold might have mentioned something to Jason during one of their fishing trips, a moment of vulnerability meant to build trust. Are you threatening me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course not, Mom, Rebecca said, her tone dripping with false innocence. I'm just pointing out that family loyalty should go both ways. You've always preached about supporting each other. But now, when Jason needs real help, you're hiding behind these arbitrary, education-only rules. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee cold and untouched, the conversation replaying in my mind like a relentless loop. My own daughter had just tried to blackmail me. My grandson had taken a private confidence shared by his grandfather and turned it into a weapon. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, a wound that throbbed with every heartbeat. When Harold returned from his morning fishing trip, he found me still at the table, staring blankly at the wall, my hands trembling. Margaret, what's wrong? He asked, setting down his tackle box and rushing to my side. I told him everything, watching his face shift from concern to disbelief to a quiet, simmering anger. She said, what? He asked, his voice low, his hands tightening into fists. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the same betrayal I felt, and it broke my heart all over again. Harold paced the kitchen, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor, each step echoing his disbelief. This can't be real, he muttered, his voice a low growl of betrayal. Jason, of all people, airing something so personal, something I shared in a moment of trust. I never imagined he'd stoop this low. His hands trembled as he shook his head, as if trying to dislodge the sting of his grandson's actions. The weight of the betrayal sat heavy in his chest, a gnawing ache that made his broad shoulders slump. He'd always seen Jason as a bright spark, a young man with potential despite his stumbles. Now that image was fracturing, and it hurt more than he could say. I sat at the table, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood, searching for calm amidst the storm. What exactly did you tell him, Harold? I asked softly, my voice steady but laced with concern. I wasn't accusing him. I just needed to understand how we'd ended up here, caught in this tangle of family secrets and broken trust. Harold sank into the chair across from me, his face etched with exhaustion. It was years ago, he began, his voice quieter now, heavy with memory. Jason was in a dark place after dropping out of college. He felt like a failure, like he'd let everyone down. I wanted to lift him up, to show him that struggles don't define you. So I told him about us, about how even your grandmother and I had our rough patches. I told him we'd separated for a short time before we realized we couldn't live without each other. His eyes met mine, filled with regret. I thought it would help him see that everyone falters, that it's part of being human. I never thought he'd twist it against us. I nodded slowly, my heart aching for Harold's good intentions. You were trying to help him, I said, my voice soft but firm. You couldn't have known he'd use it like this, as some kind of weapon. The thought of Jason leveraging such a private moment for his own gain made my stomach churn. Harold's face seemed to age before my eyes, the lines deepening, his usual warmth replaced by a weary resignation. I'm so sorry, Margaret, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I reached across the table, my hand finding his, squeezing gently. This isn't your fault, I told him, though the words felt hollow against the weight of our reality. How had we come to this? How had our once close bond with our daughter Rebecca and our grandchildren unraveled so completely? The question hung between us, unanswered, as we sat in the quiet kitchen, the ticking of the clock a reminder of time slipping away. Later that afternoon, the phone rang, and Michael's name flashed on the screen. His voice, usually so steady, carried an edge of worry. Mom, is everything okay? Rebecca's been posting some odd stuff online about family loyalty and conditional love. His concern wrapped around me like a lifeline, but it also deepened the ache in my chest. I gave him a brief account of the morning's events, too drained to relive every detail. The betrayal, the accusations, it was all too raw. After a long pause, Michael's voice came through, heavy with disbelief. I don't even know what to say. Do you want me to talk to her? No, I said firmly, though my heart wavered. This is between Rebecca and us. I don't want you caught in the crossfire. But Michael's response was gentle yet resolute. I'm already in it, Mom. We all are. This isn't just about you and Dad. It's rippling through the whole family. He was right, and the truth of it settled like a stone in my gut. By evening, the ripples had spread further. Megan, our granddaughter, sent a text laced with disappointment, accusing us of unfairly treating Jason. Ben called, his voice tinged with confusion over the cryptic social media posts he'd seen. Even Emma, always absorbed in her studies, texted to ask if everything was all right. Each message was a pinprick, a reminder of how far this fracture had spread. That night, Harold and I sat on the back porch, the moonlight dancing across the lake. Its beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil in our mirrors. We were silent for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts. Harold's pain was palpable. He'd always been the rock of our family, the one who held us together. Now he looked lost, grappling with the realization that our grandchildren, whom we'd loved so fiercely, could turn against us. For me, the hurt was layered with a mother's guilt. Had I failed Rebecca somehow, planting the seeds for this entitlement? The thought gnawed at me, but beneath it was a deeper truth. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about a demand for compliance that we couldn't and wouldn't meet. We have to stand firm, Harold said at last, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. If we give in to this manipulation, it'll never stop. I nodded, though my heart ached at the thought of the growing rift. But we need to make sure Emma and Ben know the truth, I added. I won't let Rebecca's version of events be the only one they hear. The next morning brought a new twist. An email from Jason landed in my inbox. The subject line stark. My education fund. My heart sank as I opened it, bracing for more demands or veiled threats. Instead, I found a polished business plan for Turner Sound Studios' educational division. On the surface, it was impressive. A recording studio with an educational focus, offering internships for music students and workshops for underprivileged youth. For a moment, I could see why Jason thought it might sway us. It was clever, aligning perfectly with the values we'd always emphasized: education, opportunity, giving back. But as I read further, the facade crumbled. The budget told the real story. Of the $75,000 startup costs, less than $5,000 was earmarked for the educational programs. The rest? High-end recording equipment, studio renovations, and a hefty producer's salary for Jason himself. The email ended with a curt demand. As you can see, this project fully qualifies under your education funding guidelines. I'll need the first $25,000 by next Friday to secure the studio space. The presumption in his tone stung like a slap. There was no humility, No request, just an entitled expectation, as if we were obligated to fund his dreams. Harold leaned over my shoulder, his jaw tightening as he read. "He's not even pretending," he muttered. "He's just slapped an educational label on his commercial studio and thinks we'll fall for it." His anger was quiet but fierce, a reflection of the betrayal he felt. "What do we do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We hold the line," Harold said, his voice resolute, "and we make it clear this kind of manipulation won't work." I drafted a response with care, acknowledging the educational elements, but pointing out that the budget allocation didn't align with our funding guidelines. I offered to support specific educational workshops if Jason developed them with clear metrics and accountability. His reply came almost instantly, dripping with venom. "This is ridiculous, and you know it. You're just moving the goalpost because you don't approve of my career. If you won't support me now, don't expect me in your life later." The words hit like a punch, the ultimatum raw and unapologetic. This wasn't just about money, it was a rejection of the very bond we'd nurtured for years. Before I could process the email, my phone rang. It was Rebecca, her voice sharp and accusing. "I just heard from Jason," she said, skipping any greeting. "I can't believe you are rejecting his educational proposal after saying you'd fund education." I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my composure. "Rebecca, did you read the proposal?" I asked. "Of course I did," she snapped. "It's innovative, thoughtful, combining his passion with real outreach." I pointed out the budget breakdown, less than 7% for education, the rest for commercial equipment and Jason's salary. Her response was immediate, defensive. "So what? He needs to make a living while he builds the educational side. You're just looking for excuses because you've never supported his music." "That's not true," I said, my patience fraying. "We've been to his performances, celebrated his creativity. But we won't fund a business dressed up as education." Rebecca's voice turned cold. "Fine. I guess we know where we stand. David and I will help Jason ourselves since his grandparents clearly don't care about his future." Before I could respond, she hung up, leaving me staring at the phone, my heart pounding with hurt and frustration. Harold, who'd overheard enough, placed a hand on my shoulder. "They're making their choices," he said quietly. "We can't control that. We can only decide how we respond." Mother's Day arrived, a day that should have been warm with love, but instead felt hollow. Emma and Ben sent a beautiful handmade card and a flowering plant for my garden, their thoughtfulness a balm to my wounded heart. Michael and Claire hosted us for brunch, where Emma surprised me with a framed photo of 4 generations of women in our family: my mother, me, Rebecca, and Megan. The image from happier times brought tears to my eyes, a reminder of what we'd lost. Rebecca's only gesture was a generic text at 9 p.m. "Happy Mother's Day." No call, no warmth. From Jason and Megan, there was nothing. I tried to focus on the love that was present, but the absences were a heavy weight, a reminder of the growing chasm. In the weeks that followed, the situation worsened. Rebecca's social media posts grew sharper, thinly veiled attacks on toxic parents who used money to control their children. Jason released a song titled "Conditional Love," its lyrics a barely disguised jab at us. Megan, ever loyal to her brother, amplified their posts with her own comments about resisting manipulation. It was a public campaign designed to shame us into submission. The most painful part was seeing distant relatives and old friends chime in with sympathy, unaware of the full story. Their support for Rebecca and Jason felt like a betrayal, though I knew they'd only heard one side. On a quiet evening, Harold sat at the kitchen table, his phone casting a soft glow on his face as he scrolled through another sharp-edged post online. The words on the screen seemed to taunt, each one laced with accusation. "Should we say something?" he asked, his voice heavy with hesitation, his brow furrowed as he glanced up at me. The weight of the question hung in the air, stirring a familiar unease in my chest. I shook my head slowly, my heart sinking at the thought of diving into that mess. Responding would only fan the flames, turning a simmering conflict into a public spectacle where truth gets buried under pride and hurt. No one ever wins in those battles. Instead, I turned my energy toward what mattered most, nurturing the bonds that held firm despite the noise. I picked up the phone to call Emma, her voice always a bright spot in my day, checking on her medical school applications with a mix of pride and quiet worry for her future. I invited Ben over to help him rehearse for a big presentation, watching his nervous energy transform into confidence as we practiced in the living room. These moments felt like lifelines, grounding me in what was real. Beyond the family, I poured myself into the community, seeking solace and connection. I added extra hours at the local library, where the smell of old books and the soft hum of conversation soothed my frayed nerves. Joining the gardening club was a whim that became a refuge. Digging in the earth, coaxing life from soil, gave me a sense of control when so much felt uncertain. Through it all, Harold was my rock, his steady presence, a quiet reassurance. They'll either see the truth or they won't, he'd say, his voice calm but firm, his hand resting gently on mine. We know we're doing what's right. His words were a mantra, a reminder to stay true to ourselves even when the world seemed to turn against us. Then on a sweltering July afternoon, everything shifted. The phone rang and Michael's voice came through, tight with panic, each word trembling with fear. "Mom, it's Claire. She's in the hospital. They think it's her heart." My stomach dropped, the world narrowing to the urgency in his voice. Harold and I rushed to the regional medical center, the car ride a blur of dread and unspoken prayers. We found Michael in the emergency room, pacing like a caged animal, his face pale and drawn. He explained in halting words what had happened, Claire collapsing mid-shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, her colleagues scrambling to perform CPR, the ambulance tearing through the streets with sirens screaming. "The doctors are with her now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they're not saying much." His eyes, usually so steady, were wide with terror, searching mine for answers I didn't have. Minutes later, Emma arrived, still in her scrubs from her summer internship at another hospital. Her presence was a quiet force, her clinical calm a stark contrast to the chaos in my heart. Ben followed soon after, his engineering internship an hour away forgotten as he sped to be with us. We gathered in the waiting room, a fragile knot of family amidst the sterile bustle of the emergency department. I held Michael's hand, feeling the tremor in his grip, while Harold draped an arm around Ben's shoulders, his touch steadying us all. Emma, already carrying the poise of the doctor she was training to become, asked sharp, precise questions whenever a nurse or doctor appeared, her mind cutting through the fog of fear. Hours dragged by, each minute heavy with uncertainty, the waiting room clock ticking like a heartbeat we couldn't trust. Finally, a cardiologist approached, his clipboard a shield against our anxious stares. "Mrs. Wilson has had a moderate heart attack," he said, his voice measured but kind. "We've stabilized her, but she needs a triple bypass. Her coronary arteries are significantly blocked." The words hit like a physical blow. Michael swayed and I tightened my grip on his hand, anchoring him as my own heart raced. "When?" he asked, his voice hoarse, barely holding together. "First thing tomorrow," the doctor replied. "The next 24 hours are critical. She'll be in the ICU overnight for monitoring." After he left, Michael sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I can't lose her," he whispered, the words raw with a fear so deep it seemed to echo in my own chest. Emma knelt beside him, her voice firm but gentle. "You won't. This is a routine procedure, Dad. The success rates are high and Mom's healthy otherwise." Ben chimed in, his voice steady despite the strain in his eyes. "She's strong, Dad. She exercises, eats right. She's got this." Their words were a lifeline, pulling us back from the edge of despair. I stepped away to call Rebecca, my daughter, whose absence in this moment felt like a fresh wound. Despite the tensions that had grown between us, she needed to know about her sister-in-law. The call went to voicemail, and I left a message, my voice steady but urgent, explaining Claire's condition and begging her to call back. I followed it with a text, marking it urgent, my fingers trembling as I typed. An hour passed, then 2, with no response. "Have you heard from your sister?" I asked Michael, my voice tight with hope and dread. He shook his head, his expression a mix of resignation and hurt. "I tried too. Nothing." The silence from Rebecca felt like a betrayal, a crack in the family I'd always believed was unbreakable. That evening, we were allowed to see Claire in the ICU for a brief 10 minutes. She lay there, pale and fragile, surrounded by a web of monitors and tubes, yet her eyes lit up with a weak smile when she saw us. She reached for Michael's hand, her voice a whisper. "Don't look so worried. I'm not going anywhere." Her bravery broke my heart, and I fought back tears as we left the room. A nurse approached Michael, her voice soft. "Mr. Wilson, there's a call for you at the station." "Someone named Jason?" Michael's brow furrowed in confusion, but he followed her. When he returned, his face was a storm of emotions, relief tangled with irritation. "Rebecca and the kids are at a resort in the Bahamas," he said, his voice clipped. "Jason got my messages and called the hospital. Apparently, cell service is spotty." Harold frowned, his voice low. "Are they coming back?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Jason said they'll send positive thoughts, but the trip's non-refundable." The words landed like a punch, a cold wave of disappointment washing over me. My daughter, my grandchildren, choosing a vacation over family in a moment of crisis. It felt like a fracture in everything I'd held dear. "Mom, it's okay," Michael said, his voice soft but firm, reading the pain in my eyes. "We're here, that's what counts." But the hurt lingered, a quiet ache beneath the fear for Claire. The night was endless, the hospital's reclining chairs offering little comfort. Sleep was impossible. Every swish of the ICU doors jolted us awake, hearts pounding with fear of bad news. Emma kept us anchored, translating medical jargon into words we could grasp, her calm voice soothing Michael's spiking anxiety. Ben made countless trips to the cafeteria, bringing back coffee and sandwiches, ensuring we didn't collapse under the weight of worry. Harold organized a vigil schedule, making sure someone was always alert for updates, his quiet strength holding us together. Morning came, and with it, a flurry of activity as Claire was prepped for surgery. We saw her briefly before they wheeled her away, her face pale but resolute. We exchanged tense smiles and whispered, "I love yous," each word fragile with the weight of what might come. As they took her to the operating room, Michael turned to me, his eyes brimming with tears. "She made me promise to call Rebecca again," he said, his voice breaking. "She doesn't want any regrets if things don't go well." I nodded, squeezing his arm, my throat tight. "I'll try her too." This time Rebecca answered on the fourth ring, her voice bright and carefree. "Mom, what's going on? We're about to go parasailing." The casual tone, after all the urgent messages, ignited a spark of anger in me, but I swallowed it. "Claire's going into heart surgery now," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Triple bypass. Michael and the kids are here at Memorial Hospital. It's serious." There was a pause, then a muffled conversation in the background. Rebecca talking to someone, probably David. "Look, we're on day 2 of a 7-day trip," she said finally. "This resort's remote. It took hours to get here. By the time we could get flights, the surgery would be over." I closed my eyes, fighting for calm. "This isn't just about the surgery, Rebecca. It's about being here for your brother, for your niece and nephew who are terrified of losing their mom." Her response was sharp. "They've got you and Dad there. And honestly, after everything, I'm not sure Michael even wants me there." My heart ached at her words. "Of course he wants you here. You're his sister." She sighed, heavy and distant. "Mom, you don't get it. Jason's been so stressed about the studio. This vacation is the first time he's been happy in months. I can't take that from him." In that moment, something broke inside me. Rebecca wasn't just indulging her children's whims. She was choosing their fleeting happiness over the family ties I'd always believed were sacred. "I see," I said, my voice quiet but cold. "I'll let you know when Claire's out of surgery." The call ended, and I stood there, the weight of her absence settling like a stone in my chest. The 6-hour surgery was an eternity. We paced the waiting room, jumping at every announcement, caught between hope and dread. Emma stayed close to Michael, explaining medical terms with a clarity that kept us grounded. Ben busied himself organizing food deliveries as more family arrived. Claire's sister from Detroit, her elderly father from Grand Rapids, cousins and friends who dropped everything to be there. Harold watched it all, his eyes meeting mine in silent understanding, a bond forged over decades. We didn't need words to share our pride in Emma and Ben, our worry for Michael, or the sting of Rebecca's absence. Finally, the surgeon emerged, still in his scrubs, his expression tired but hopeful. The surgery went well, he said, and the room seemed to exhale as one. We bypassed all three blocked arteries. Her vitals are stable, and barring complications, she should make a full recovery. Michael broke down, tears streaming as Emma held him tightly. Ben stood close, his own eyes glistening. Around us, Claire's family and friends embraced, their relief a quiet celebration. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Any news? I replied with the good news, adding that her brother could use her support during Claire's recovery. The words felt heavy, a final plea for her to see what truly mattered. As we stood together, surrounded by those who'd shown up, I felt a bittersweet gratitude. The crisis had revealed the strength of the family we had here, even as it exposed the fractures in those who chose to stay away. Claire's recovery would be a long road, but we'd walk it together, held by love and loyalty that no distance could break. Claire's journey to recovery promised to be a long and arduous one, a reality that weighed heavily on everyone who loved her. When I shared the news of her condition with Rebecca, my daughter, her response came almost instantly, as if she'd barely paused to absorb the gravity of the situation. Great news. We'll send flowers. Maybe we can visit when we get back next week if they're still in the hospital. The words landed like a cold slap. If they're still in the hospital, as if Claire's life-threatening illness was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a scheduling conflict to be slotted around her family's vacation plans. The casual dismissal in her message twisted something deep in my chest, a mix of disbelief, disappointment, and a creeping sorrow that felt too familiar. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure how to respond to this stranger who bore my daughter's name. I showed the text to Harold, my husband, whose weathered hands tightened around his coffee mug as he read it. His eyes, usually warm and steady, clouded with a quiet grief. "I don't recognize her anymore," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might make it more real. When did she become this person? I had no answer to give him. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years. The Rebecca I'd raised had been a girl with a heart so big it seemed to spill over. She'd spent her afternoons visiting elderly neighbors, her laughter echoing through their quiet homes as she helped with chores or listened to their stories. She'd volunteered at the animal shelter, coming home with fur on her clothes and a glow in her eyes. She'd written heartfelt notes to family members in tough times, her words weaving comfort and love. But somewhere along the way, that empathetic young woman had morphed into someone who could brush off a family crisis with the nonchalance of canceling a lunch date. The transformation felt like a betrayal, not just of Claire, but of the daughter I thought I knew. Over the next few days, our family settled into a new rhythm, one dictated by hospital schedules and the slow, steady progress of Claire's recovery. She'd been moved from the intensive care unit to a regular room, her condition stabilizing enough to offer cautious hope. Michael, Claire's husband, took family leave from his teaching job, planting himself at her bedside with the devotion that seemed to anchor the entire family. His face was etched with exhaustion, but his love for Claire shone through in every small gesture. The way he adjusted her pillow, the quiet conversations they shared when they thought no one was listening. Emma and Ben, their children, juggled hospital visits with their summer jobs and internships, their young faces carrying a maturity beyond their years. They brought home-cooked meals to the hospital, the scent of lasagna or chicken soup filling the sterile room with a touch of home. They carried fresh clothes for their father, ensuring he had something clean to wear amidst the chaos. Harold and I became the backbone of this fragile operation. We drove Ben to work when his eyes were too heavy with fatigue to trust behind the wheel. We sat with Emma in the hospital waiting room, her laptop open as she reviewed medical school applications, her brow furrowed with determination. I'd offer small suggestions, my heart swelling with pride at her ambition. Even as I worried about the toll this was taking on her, we made sure Michael ate, coaxing him away from Claire's bedside for a sandwich or a cup of coffee, reminding him that he couldn't care for her if he collapsed. Through it all, Rebecca and her family remained in the Bahamas, their involvement reduced to sporadic text messages asking for updates. Each one felt like a pinprick, a reminder of their absence. I replied with brief, factual responses, no longer wasting energy trying to make them grasp the magnitude of what they were missing. My heart ached, but I pushed it down, focusing on the family members who were here who showed up. On the 5th day after Claire's surgery, As she began taking tentative steps down the hospital corridor with the help of a nurse, I received an unexpected text from Megan, Rebecca's daughter. "Grandma, are you at the hospital? Can I come see you?" I stared at the message, confusion knitting my brows. According to Rebecca, their entire family was still lounging at the resort, soaking up the sun while Claire fought for her life. "Of course," I texted back, my fingers hesitating only briefly. "We're in room 412. An hour later, Megan appeared in the doorway of Claire's room, looking like a shadow of her usual self. Her normally flawless hair was pulled back in a simple, slightly messy ponytail, and her face was bare of makeup, a stark contrast to the polished, Instagram-ready image she usually projected. She seemed smaller somehow, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure she belonged here. "Megan," Michael said, his voice tinged with surprise as he looked up from Claire's bedside. "I thought you were in the Bahamas." "I was," she replied softly, her eyes flickering to Claire. "I came back early." Claire, propped up in her hospital bed, managed a weak smile, her face pale but warm with affection. "It's good to see you, sweetheart." Megan approached cautiously, as if afraid she might break something fragile. She bent to give Claire a gentle hug, her movements careful but sincere. "I'm so sorry this happened, Aunt Claire," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." During her brief visit, Megan was attentive, asking Claire how she was feeling, listening intently to her quiet responses. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in years, and it stirred a cautious hope in me. After a while, Megan asked if I'd join her in the hospital cafeteria. Curious about this unexpected turn, I followed her. We settled at a small table with cups of lukewarm hospital-grade coffee, the kind that tastes more like regret than caffeine. Megan stared down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously around the cup. "I had a huge fight with Mom and Jason," she said finally, her voice barely audible, "about not coming back for Aunt Claire's surgery." I leaned back in my chair, giving her space to continue, sensing the weight of what she was about to share. "It just felt so wrong," she went on, her voice gaining strength. "Uncle Michael has always been there for us. Remember when I crashed my car senior year, and he drove 3 hours to help me deal with the insurance company? Or when Jason got arrested for that stupid bar fight, and Uncle Michael was the one who bailed him out because Dad was away on business?" I nodded, surprised by the clarity of her perspective. These weren't just memories, they were anchors, moments that had shaped her sense of family. "So I told Mom we needed to go home," she continued, her voice trembling with conviction. "That Aunt Claire being in the hospital was more important than parasailing and beach parties. Jason said I was being dramatic, that Aunt Claire would be fine with or without us there." She hesitated, her expression pained. "Mom said I was turning into a judgmental prude like you." The words stung, a sharp reminder of the rift that had grown between Rebecca and me, but I kept my face neutral, encouraging Megan to go on. "What happened then?" "I packed my bags and took a taxi to the airport," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Used my emergency credit card to book a flight home. Guess I finally found an actual emergency to use it for." "Your mother must have been upset," I observed, keeping my tone steady. Megan nodded, her eyes distant. "She said if I left, I was choosing their side over family. I told her that's exactly what she was doing too, choosing vacation over family. She didn't like that. I felt a surge of pride at Megan's courage, her willingness to stand up to her mother and brother, even at the cost of their approval. For years, she'd followed their lead, blending seamlessly into their world of shallow priorities and curated appearances. This act of defiance, this spark of independent thought, was new and deeply heartening. "I'm proud of you," I said simply, my voice warm with sincerity. "It takes courage to stand up for what you believe is right, especially to the people closest to you." Megan looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said back when you changed the education funding," she said, her voice shaky, "about investing in futures and encouraging growth. I didn't get it then. I was just mad that you were being unfair to Jason." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "But these past few months in my education classes, working with kids who have so little but try so hard, it's changed how I see things. Some of my classmates are working 2 jobs to afford teaching degrees That'll lead to careers with modest salaries. They're doing it because they believe in the value of education, not for the money. I reached across the table and took her hand, my heart swelling with a mix of relief and gratitude. That perspective is a gift, Megan, I said softly. Not everyone gets it, and many who do come to it much later in life. She whispered, her voice breaking. I was so awful to you. The way we all were, using Grandpa's private story against you, the social media posts, the silent treatment. How can you even stand to look at me? Because you're my granddaughter, I said firmly, squeezing her hand. And because people make mistakes, learn and grow. That's what life is. Megan wiped away a tear, her voice barely audible. Mom and Jason won't forgive me for leaving. They're saying I betrayed them. Give them time, I advised, though privately I wondered if Rebecca had the capacity for the self-reflection needed to mend this fracture. In the meantime, you're always welcome at our home. Always. Megan's return marked a turning point in our family's story, a glimmer of hope amidst the strain. That evening, she joined us for dinner at Michael and Claire's house, where Emma had carefully prepared a meal tailored to her mother's post-surgical dietary needs. The atmosphere was tense at first, with Emma and Ben eyeing their cousin warily, their guarded expressions reflecting months of hurt from her family's social media hostility. But as the evening unfolded, something remarkable happened. Megan engaged with her cousins in a way I hadn't seen in years. She asked Emma about her medical school plans, listening intently as Emma described her dreams of becoming a pediatrician. She asked Ben about his engineering projects, her curiosity genuine as he explained his latest design. She even volunteered to help with the dishes, a small but meaningful gesture that softened the room's edges. By the time we left, the ice had begun to thaw. Ben offered to help Megan move into her new apartment near the education department, a practical gesture that carried the weight of reconciliation. Emma invited her to a study group for an advanced psychology course they were both taking, a bridge extended across the divide. As Harold and I drove home along the moonlit lake road, he chuckled softly. Well, I certainly didn't see that coming. People can surprise you, I replied, my mind replaying Megan's transformation over dinner. Sometimes in good ways. Do you think Rebecca will come around too? He asked, his voice tinged with cautious hope. I sighed, staring out at the dark water. I don't know, it would require her to face some painful truths about herself and the way she's raised her children. That's never easy, and Jason, he's always followed her lead. If she changes, there is hope for him too, but I won't hold my breath. As we pulled into our driveway, the headlights swept across our lakeside home, the dream Harold and I had built over decades. It was our sanctuary, a place Rebecca had once casually suggested we sell to fund Jason's latest business venture. The memory stung, but it also deepened my appreciation for what we'd created. A life rooted in love, resilience, and principle. The family fracture had been painful, the confrontations raw and wounding, but through it all, we'd held firm. And now, unexpectedly, those same principles were bearing fruit in Megan's growing maturity, her newfound clarity. It wasn't the resolution I'd anticipated, but as Harold and I settled onto our porch swing, the stars reflecting on the still lake waters, I felt a quiet certainty that it was exactly what our family needed. Claire's recovery continued, slow but steady. After a week in the hospital, she was discharged with a detailed care plan, medications, rest, and strict instructions to take it easy. Michael transformed their living room into a temporary bedroom, sparing her the challenge of stairs. Our family's rhythm adjusted again, each of us finding ways to support Claire's healing while navigating our own lives. Through it all, Megan's presence remained a steady, hopeful note, a reminder that change was possible, even in the most fractured of families. The family settled into a rhythm entirely shaped by Claire's recovery, each member weaving their own thread into the fabric of her healing. Emma, with her medical expertise, became the unspoken leader of this delicate operation. Her days were consumed with crafting meticulous, color-coded medication schedules that hung like a lifeline on the fridge. She patiently guided Michael through the intricacies of wound care, her steady hands demonstrating techniques until he could manage on his own. Emma's sharp intuition also told her when Claire was overexerting herself, her voice firm but kind as she insisted her sister rest. Beneath her clinical precision, Emma carried a quiet weight, an unspoken fear that any misstep could unravel Claire's fragile progress. Yet she buried it, focusing instead on the tasks that gave her control over the chaos. Ben, meanwhile, embraced his role as the household's anchor with a diligence that surprised everyone. He took charge of grocery runs, navigating crowded aisles with a mental checklist of Claire's dietary needs. In the kitchen, he chopped vegetables and stirred pots with a focus that betrayed his worry, each meal a small offering of love. The doorbell rang constantly with neighbors and friends bearing casseroles and sympathetic smiles, and Ben greeted them all with warmth, even when exhaustion tugged at his eyes. He'd lie awake at night, wondering how long he could keep the family's spirits buoyed, but each morning he rose with renewed determination to hold things together. Megan's presence was a revelation. Every evening after her college classes, she'd arrive at Claire's house, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her face lit with quiet resolve. Sometimes she brought books or magazines, carefully chosen to distract Claire from the pain. Other times, she simply sat by her aunt's side, holding her hand when the others were caught up in chores. There was a tenderness in Megan's actions, a newfound patience that seemed to bloom in the shadow of Claire's illness. She listened to Claire's stories with full attention, her laughter soft but genuine, her questions thoughtful. Claire, propped up on pillows one afternoon, watched Megan gather her things to leave for class. "That girl's going to be an incredible teacher," she murmured, her voice thick with pride. "She has that rare gift of being entirely present with whoever she's with." I nodded, my heart swelling as I thought of the Megan from just months ago, a young woman glued to her phone, barely glancing up at family dinners. Now her transformation felt like a quiet miracle, a sign of the woman she was becoming. Rebecca, Jason, and David returned from their vacation 10 days after Claire's surgery, their absence during the crisis a silent wedge between the family's branches. Rebecca sent a brief text announcing their return, but days passed without a visit, her excuses of jet lag and work piling up like a flimsy shield. When they finally arrived at Claire and Michael's home 3 days later, the contrast was jarring. Rebecca swept in like a whirlwind, clutching an extravagant bouquet that screamed more of status than sincerity. Her tailored blazer and heels clinked against the hardwood, out of place in the cozy lived-in space. She air-kissed Claire's cheeks, her voice bright but hollow as she declared, "You look fantastic, almost back to normal." Claire, pale and moving with the careful slowness of someone still tethered to pain, offered a tight smile. "It's a long road, but I'm getting there," she said, her words measured. Rebecca gestured to the flowers, oblivious to Claire's watering eyes, her allergies flaring from the heavy scent. "These are from that exclusive florist in Chicago," Rebecca boasted. "Cost a fortune, but only the best for family. Right?" Michael, ever observant, quietly carried the arrangement to the porch, exchanging a glance with Emma that spoke of shared frustration. David lingered at the edges of the room, his eyes flicking to his watch as if counting down the minutes until escape. His presence felt perfunctory, a box to check rather than a gesture of care. Jason, trailing behind his parents, slouched through the door and immediately asked for the Wi-Fi password, his face illuminated by his phone's screen for the rest of the visit. The trio's detachment hung heavy in the air, a stark opposite to the warmth of those who'd been there through the sleepless nights. Their visit lasted exactly 47 minutes, a time frame David seemed to track with precision. Rebecca filled the silence with tales of their resort vacation, sunlit beaches and gourmet dinners, barely pausing to ask about Claire's recovery. As they prepared to leave, she pulled me aside in the hallway, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Mom, we need to talk about Megan. She's been impossible since she left the vacation early. She won't answer my texts and barely speaks to Jason. I think you're turning her against us." The accusation was so absurd it nearly drew a bark of laughter from me, but I swallowed it, stung by her tone. "Rebecca, Megan's an adult making her own choices," I said evenly. "We haven't influenced her in any way." Rebecca's lips thinned, her eyes flashing. "Then why did she ditch her family to rush back for Claire, who was clearly fine and had plenty of help?" I searched her face for a trace of self-awareness, some flicker of understanding that her words dripped with callousness. Finding none, I chose my response with care. Perhaps Megan felt being there for family during a medical crisis was more important than finishing a vacation. Rebecca bristled, her voice sharp. That's exactly the problem. That sanctimonious tone implying we were wrong for not dropping our trip for a surgery that went perfectly. I took a deep breath, knowing a fight would only widen the rift. We all make our choices, Rebecca. Megan made hers, you made yours. Let's leave it at that. She gave me a cold, appraising look before turning away. Fine, but this isn't over, she said, her words lingering like a threat. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca launched a calculated campaign to pull Megan back into her orbit, or more accurately, under her control. It began with a flood of affection, designer bags delivered to Megan's apartment, invitations to upscale restaurants, promises of a lavish spring break trip to Europe. Megan, however, remained unmoved, her independence growing like a sturdy root. When charm failed, Rebecca's tactics turned sinister. She called Megan's professors, voicing fabricated concerns about her daughter's pivot from fashion marketing to education, hinting at a possible mental health crisis. She contacted Megan's landlord with lies about rowdy parties at her apartment, hoping to destabilize her living situation. In a stunning escalation, Rebecca even tried to have Megan's car repossessed, claiming that since she and David had co-signed the loan, they could reclaim it if Megan wasn't using it appropriately. Each move backfired, pushing Megan closer to our side, Claire, Michael, Emma, and me, while widening the chasm between her and her parents. One evening in late August, Megan arrived at our house, her face a mix of weariness and defiance. She sank onto the couch, her voice trembling as she said, "Mom's lost it. She's threatening to cut off my tuition if I don't switch back to marketing." Harold, setting aside his newspaper, frowned. "Can she do that? I thought your tuition was covered by your grandfather's trust." Megan nodded, her fingers twisting together. "It is, but Mom and Dad are the trustees until I'm 25. They can withhold funds if they think I'm not using them properly." I sat beside her, my concern deepening. "What do you plan to do?" Megan straightened, her jaw set with a determination that took my breath away. "I'm going to get away, apply for loans, scholarships, whatever it takes. I'm not giving up on my education just because she's throwing a tantrum." Harold and I shared a look, a wordless pact forming between us. "Megan," I said carefully, "our offer to help with your education still stands. If your parents cut you off, we'll cover it." To our surprise, she shook her head firmly. "I'm so grateful, really, but I need to do this on my own. It's time I stopped depending on anyone financially." Her resolve was both awe-inspiring and quietly worrying. I leaned in, softening my tone. "At least let us help you find a job that fits with your classes." After some gentle nudging, she agreed. Within a week, Megan landed a role as a teacher's aide at a preschool near campus, a perfect match for her education major, with hours flexible enough to keep her studies on track. When Rebecca learned Megan had sidestepped her financial leverage, her fury flared anew. She doubled down, this time turning her campaign against Harold and me directly. She stopped acknowledging us at community gatherings, crossing the street to avoid us downtown. She told friends she was taking space from her parents due to unspecified toxic behavior, her vagueness a weapon to paint us as villains. Then came the legal letter arriving on a chilly September morning in a sleek envelope from a law firm. Its contents left us stunned. Rebecca and David demanded an early distribution from our estate for Jason's business venture, citing a supposed verbal agreement Harold had made years ago. The letter hinted at legal action if we didn't comply. Harold read it 3 times, his face draining of color with each pass. "I never promised anything," he said, his voice shaking in a way I'd rarely heard. I took the letter from his hands, my own anger steadying me. "Of course you didn't. This is nonsense." "But why would they do this?" he asked, his voice trailing off. I squeezed his hand, my heart heavy with the answer. "They've convinced themselves they're entitled to our money, and when people believe that, they'll justify anything to get it." That same day, we met with our attorney, Robert, a trusted friend who'd handled our legal matters for years. He studied the letter, scribbling notes. "This is bold, but baseless," he said, setting it aside. "There's no evidence to support their claim." His calm certainty steadied us, but the betrayal lingered, a bruise that deepened with time. Harold leaned forward in his chair, his weathered hands clasped tightly, a glimmer of hope flickering in his tired eyes. So there was no promise, verbal or otherwise, right? And even if there had been, it wouldn't hold up legally against our estate. We can just let this go. His voice carried a quiet plea, as though he yearned for a simple resolution to the storm brewing around them. Robert, their attorney, shook his head slowly, his expression firm yet measured. I wouldn't advise ignoring it, Harold. We need to address this head on, set clear boundaries, and make it unmistakable that their claims have no ground to stand on. Robert's fingers moved swiftly across his keyboard as he crafted a response, each word chosen with precision. The letter was courteous, but left no room for misinterpretation. There had never been any promise of an early inheritance, no commitment to fund anyone's dreams prematurely. Their estate was their own to manage, and any future discussions on the matter should go through Robert, not them directly. As they left his office, Robert's voice was steady, reassuring. This should put an end to it. They have no legal standing, and they know it. This is likely just a scare tactic, nothing more. Harold nodded, though a knot of unease lingered in his chest. Margaret, walking beside him, felt it too, a quiet dread that this was far from over. But Rebecca and Jason, undeterred by the legal dead end, shifted their strategy to a more public battlefield. The first hint of their new approach came through a phone call from Claire, their daughter-in-law, one chilly evening. Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. Margaret, have you seen what Jason's been posting about you and Harold online? Margaret's heart sank. At 72, she had little use for social media, its endless scroll of opinions and outrage, a world she'd never felt compelled to join. No, I haven't, she admitted, her grip tightening on the phone. What's he saying? Claire's words came in a rush, each one landing like a blow. He's making terrible accusations, claiming you promised to bankroll his art studio and then backed out. He's saying you've always favored Emma and Ben over him, that you're hoarding your wealth out of spite, and— Claire hesitated, her voice dropping to a pained whisper. He's even hinting that Harold might not be mentally fit to handle your finances. Margaret's blood turned to ice. The suggestion about Harold's mental state wasn't just cruel, it was a calculated assault on his dignity. Harold, with his engineer's mind, had always been sharp as a blade, his memory for numbers and details undimmed by his 70s. To imply otherwise was to strip him of the quiet pride he carried, the certainty that his mind was still his greatest asset. Margaret's voice shook as she responded, That's a lie, all of it. Claire sighed, her anger giving way to exhaustion. Michael's furious. He wanted to fire back online, but I told him it'd just make things worse. Margaret nodded, though Claire couldn't see it. She was right. A public feud would only fan the flames, dragging their entire family into the mud. Still, the thought of these accusations spreading through their small town, among cousins, old friends and neighbors, cut deeply. Margaret could already imagine the whispers, the sidelong glances at church or the grocery store. The pain of it settled into her bones, heavy and unrelenting. What came next was stranger, more invasive, and somehow even more wounding. Rebecca began reaching out to Margaret's former colleagues and students, people from her decades as a high school principal. Margaret learned of this during her monthly lunch with Eleanor Rodriguez, her former assistant principal and successor. They sat at their usual table at the hearth, the cozy diner where they'd shared countless conversations over the years. Eleanor's face was grim as she set down her coffee mug. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Rebecca called me last week asking all sorts of odd questions about your time as principal, parent complaints, disciplinary issues, any trouble with the school board. She said it was for some family history project, but it didn't sit right. Margaret's fork froze midair, her appetite vanishing. What did you tell her? She asked, her voice barely steady. Eleanor's gaze was fierce with loyalty. I told her you were the most respected principal this town ever had, that your students still ask about you when I run into them, years after they've graduated. I said if she was digging for dirt on Margaret Wilson, she was barking up the wrong tree. Margaret's eyes stung with gratitude, warring against the sting of betrayal. Why was Rebecca doing this? Was it pure vengeance for their refusal to fund Jason's studio? Or was she building a case, weaving a narrative to paint Margaret as untrustworthy, even in her professional legacy? The answer arrived a week later in the form of a letter from a family counseling center in Chicago. It was an invitation to mediation, penned by a woman who called herself a family reconciliation specialist. The letter was polished, professional, but its words were a slap. Your daughter and grandson are deeply hurt by what they perceive as conditional love and financial manipulation, it read. They seek professional guidance to heal these wounds and rebuild healthier family ties. Harold read the letter aloud, his voice growing incredulous. Financial abuse? They're accusing us of financial abuse because we won't hand over our savings? He set the letter down, his hands trembling, not with frailty, but with the fury he rarely let surface. Margaret's emotions were a tangle: anger at the absurdity of the claim, grief for the warped reality Rebecca and Jason inhabited, and a small, gnawing fear. What if this counselor believed their story? What if she'd already cast Harold and Margaret as the heartless patriarch and matriarch of a fractured family? After days of soul-searching, they declined the mediation. Instead, they sent a concise reply stating they'd consider family counseling only with a truly neutral party, someone unswayed by Rebecca's version of events. This refusal sparked the next phase of the campaign. Rebecca and Jason began appearing at public events where they knew Harold and Margaret would be, orchestrating moments of tension that stopped just shy of outright scenes. At the Lakeside Autumn Festival, they stationed themselves near the community center's entrance, forcing Harold and Margaret to pass them to view the art exhibition showcasing Harold's intricate woodworking. As they approached, Rebecca's voice rose, pointedly loud. Some people care more about their hobbies than their family's well-being, she said to her companion, her eyes locked on them. Harold's grip on Margaret's arm, his jaw tight, was the only sign of his restraint. At a hospital fundraiser where Claire worked, Jason sidled up near donors chatting with Harold, dropping veiled remarks about elders who cling to their money while the young struggle. The donors, visibly uneasy, mumbled excuses and slipped away, leaving Harold to swallow his humiliation in silence. Margaret's heart ached for him, for the way his shoulders slumped as they moved through the crowd, his usual warmth dimmed. The deepest cut came at Emma's closing ceremony, a milestone in her medical education that should have been a day of unalloyed pride. The whole family gathered to celebrate, their faces glowing with love for Emma. But Rebecca and Jason arrived late, sitting stone-faced in the back. When the ceremony ended, they left without a word to Emma, their presence a deliberate shadow over the joy. Margaret watched Emma's smile flicker as she noticed their exit, and the pain was a knife twist in her chest. Through it all, Harold and Margaret strove to hold their heads high, pouring their energy into their other relationships. They cheered louder at Bethany's academic triumphs, supported Ben's studies, stood by Michael and Claire as Claire healed, and delighted in Megan's visits, watching her flourish in her education program. But the relentless pressure was taking its toll, especially on Harold. Margaret noticed the signs: sleepless nights, small lapses in memory that might have been brushed off as normal aging, but now felt ominous under the weight of Jason's cruel insinuations. Harold retreated more often to his workshop, losing himself in the rhythm of sanding and carving, the precise angles of his creations a refuge from the mess of family strife. One crisp October night, Margaret found him on the porch swing, gazing out at the lake, where moonlight shimmered like a path to another, gentler world. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, pulling a shawl tight against the cold. "It's freezing." "Just thinking," Harold said, his voice soft, distant as the horizon. Margaret settled beside him, alarmed by the melancholy in his face. "What's on your mind?" she pressed gently. He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Then, in a voice raw with doubt, he asked, "Did we fail with Rebecca, Margaret? Did we do something wrong in how we raised her?" The question hit Margaret like a wave, stirring memories of their parenting years. "I don't think so," she said, her voice careful, searching. "We raised both our kids with the same principles. Work hard, be honest, show compassion. Michael took those to heart. Rebecca, she chose a different road." "But why?" Harold's voice cracked, his eyes searching hers for an answer. "Was it something we did? Did we favor Michael somehow?" Margaret's mind sifted through decades, looking for patterns, moments of imbalance. "If anything, we were tougher on Michael, stricter rules, more responsibilities." Rebecca was, well, she seemed more fragile, so maybe we shielded her a bit more. Maybe too much. Maybe, Harold murmured, his gaze drifting back to the lake. I keep remembering this one time when she was, 16? She blew her allowance money on a concert ticket and then came right away asking for more, for a dress to wear to it. I told her to pick something she already had, and she threw a tantrum, saying I was ruining her social life. Margaret nodded, recalling the drama, the way Rebecca's tears had worn them down until she got her way. I gave in so often, Harold admitted, his voice heavy with regret. It was easier than fighting her battles. But now I wonder if every time I caved, I was teaching her that the world owed her something, that she could demand what she wanted and expect it to be handed over. His words hung in the air, a quiet confession of doubt that mirrored Margaret's own fears. The moonlight cast long shadows, and for the first time in their long partnership, they sat with the weight of wondering if their love had, in its softness, sown the seeds of this bitter harvest. As I held Harold's hand, its familiar warmth anchored me in a moment thick with introspection. We had poured our hearts into raising our children, guided by love and the limited wisdom we possessed back then. Parenting offered no blueprint, no roadmap for the intricate balance of nurturing and discipline. Harold's wistful smile echoed my own as he agreed, musing that if a guidebook existed, it would undoubtedly warn against letting wealth eclipse emotional ties. His insight cut deep, exposing a painful reality we'd both sidestepped. In our household, money had become the primary expression of love for Rebecca Turner. By extension, Jason and Megan. Affection was conveyed through extravagant gifts and financial aid, not shared moments or heartfelt talks. Issues were buried under checks, not resolved through understanding. Even now, Rebecca's efforts to repair her bond with Megan relied on costly tokens rather than tackling the root causes. We can still show them a better way, I said softly, determination threading my words. For Megan, at least. And maybe someday for Jason and Rebecca, if they're willing. Harold nodded, but the uncertainty in his gaze spoke louder than words. The burden of our family's strife weighed on him, carving deeper lines of exhaustion into his expression than I'd fully grasped until now. A week later, a new development rocked our fragile truce. Michael's call arrived one evening, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Mom, I need to know. Rebecca's telling folks in Lakeside that you and Dad are planning to write her and her kids out of your estate. Mrs. Larson at the pharmacy brought it up to Claire today, asking if it was true and expressing pity over the family divide. I shut my eyes, frustration surging within me. It's completely untrue, I replied, keeping my tone even despite the chaos inside. Our will hasn't changed in years. Michael exhaled heavily. I know, but the rumors are gaining traction. A few of my coworkers have heard different spins on it. The idea of our personal struggles fueling small-town gossip churned my stomach. We'd spent decades building a reputation in Lakeside grounded in honesty and community service, and now our daughter was undermining it with lies. Michael paused, then added, There's more. Jason showed up at Ben's dorm yesterday, drunk. He was raving about family loyalty, accusing Ben and Emma of robbing him of his inheritance. Campus security had to step in. My pulse quickened. Is Ben all right? I asked, anxiety gripping me. He's rattled, but okay, Michael said, more angry than scared. He said he's never seen Jason act like this. After the call, I recounted it to my husband, who looked more weary than startled. They're upping the ante, he said softly. When intimidation didn't work, they turned to public pressure. Now they're going after the kids. I wondered what they hoped to achieve. Surely targeting Ben wouldn't sway us to fund Jason's studio. Harold's reply was somber. This isn't about reason anymore. It's vengeance. He nailed it. Rebecca and Jason's actions had morphed into something uglier, fueled by bruised egos and a deep-seated sense of entitlement. The next day, I reached out to our lawyer, Robert, to revise our will, not to cut anyone off, as Rebecca falsely spread, but to fortify our intentions. We set up educational trusts for all 4 grandchildren, designated strictly for tuition and related costs, overseen by impartial trustees with clear rules. We also included an antique contest clause, ensuring that anyone legally contesting the will would lose their portion. Robert noted that these steps wouldn't silence the rumors, but would safeguard our wishes and the grandchildren's opportunities. Harold's steadfast tone reinforced this. That's what counts. Driving home, a poignant blend of determination and grief settled over me. These legal barriers were essential, yet they marked a heartbreaking erosion of family trust. In an ideal world, children would honor their elders' decisions, and grandchildren would respect their choices. But our reality was far from ideal. Years ago, as I held my infants, I envisioned a close-knit clan united by love. Now we were grappling with a family fracture I'd never foreseen. November brought a brief pause in the storm. Rebecca and Jason appeared to back off, perhaps sensing that public outbursts and rumors weren't working. For a few weeks, an uneasy calm prevailed. No communication, but no fresh attacks. I embraced this quiet to cherish the relationships that still warmed our hearts. Emma's updates from medical school were a bright spot, her tales of clinical rotations alive with enthusiasm. Ben beamed about his acceptance into a top-tier engineering internship for the summer, his drive quietly inspiring us. Megan was shining in her education practicum, her mentor lauding her as a future game-changer in teaching. Even Claire's health showed steady gains. By Thanksgiving, she could manage the stairs to her bedroom, though fatigue still lingered. We planned a low-key Thanksgiving at our lakehouse, just Michael's family, Megan, and us. I texted Rebecca, inviting her, David, and Jason, hoping to offer a small bridge. Her curt, "We have other plans," stung but didn't shock. Maybe it was better this way. The day itself was a haven of warmth, filled with good food, laughter, and unstrained connection. At the table, I watched Harold carve the turkey with precision, Michael and Claire's quiet gestures of love, Emma and Ben's spirited science debate, and Megan's newfound ease as she pitched in. This was family, flawed, not whole, but authentic and grounding. Whatever lay ahead with Rebecca and Jason, we'd be all right. December, though, delivered a jolt none of us saw coming. While helping at the Lakeside Library's holiday book fair, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Stepping into the crisp air, I answered, and Alicia Mendez from Lakeview Community Bank introduced herself. "I'm calling regarding Jason Turner," she said. My heart dropped. "He listed you as a reference for a business loan application. He's seeking funds for a recording studio and stated that you and your husband will guarantee the loan." Shock rendered me speechless. Jason had not only used our names without permission, but had claimed we'd back his loan, implying we'd cover any default. "Mrs. Wilson?" Alicia prompted. "Yes," I croaked. "There's been a mistake. We haven't agreed to any loan." She hesitated. "He submitted documents showing your commitment, including loan forms with your signatures." Cold dread gripped me. "That's impossible. We never signed those." After the call, I reached Harold, whose disbelief mirrored mine. We contacted Robert, who advised filing a police report for forgery and alerting the bank's fraud team. The next 48 hours blurred with legal meetings, sworn statements, and tense talks with bank officials. We discovered Jason had crafted fake documents, including a forged letter of support and loan guarantees with our signatures. The bank paused the application, and Robert sent cease and desist letters to Jason and Rebecca. We also notified our financial institutions to block further misuse. The sting of betrayal cut deeper than I'd ever imagined, a wound that pulsed with every new revelation about Jason's actions. As Harold and I took the necessary steps to place fraud alerts on our accounts and credit reports, a heavy fog of disbelief settled over me. I clung to a fragile hope that Rebecca, my own daughter, hadn't been complicit in Jason's scheme, that this was his reckless ambition acting alone, not a calculated betrayal woven by both of them. That hope, though, crumbled like ash when Michael called, his voice taut with barely contained fury. "She's defending him, Mom," he said, each word sharp with indignation. "Rebecca's out there on social media, spinning this whole thing like Jason just misunderstood some casual promise we made to fund his studio." The words landed like a blow, shattering any illusions I'd held. Rebecca wasn't just aware of Jason's forgery, she was actively shielding him, painting his deliberate deceit as a harmless mistake. The realization twisted in my chest, a mix of grief and outrage that made it hard to breathe. This wasn't just a family squabble or the usual emotional tug-of-war we'd navigated before. This was something darker, something criminal. A calculated attempt to defraud us, to entangle us in a web of debt that could have unraveled everything we'd built. As Christmas loomed, that betrayal cast a long shadow over what had always been a season of warmth and unity. The holiday had been our family's touchstone, a time when we'd gather to mend frayed bonds, share laughter over cinnamon rolls, and revel in the simple joy of being together. But now those connections felt like fragile threads, stretched to the breaking point and perhaps beyond repair. I found myself wrestling with questions I'd never thought I'd face. Could we ever rebuild trust with family members who'd stooped to such deception? Was reconciliation even possible when the wound ran this deep? The weight of those questions pressed against my heart, making every festive light and carol feel like a mockery of the joy we'd once shared. Christmas morning arrived, but instead of stockings in the familiar chaos of our traditional gathering, Harold and I sat in a sterile office, poring over security footage with a fraud investigator. The man, polite but firm, apologized for scheduling the meeting on such a day, explaining that the severity of the case left him no choice. His words blurred together as I watched grainy footage of Jason at the bank, his confident stride and casual demeanor, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd unleashed. The bank had confirmed the signatures on the loan documents were forged, and they were pursuing their own investigation alongside the police. Each detail hammered home the reality of what we were facing, stripping away any lingering denial. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act, one that threatened not just our finances, but the very foundation of our family. Determined to claw back some semblance of holiday spirit, we hosted a small Christmas dinner that evening. Michael, Claire, Emma, Ben, and Megan gathered around our dining table, the aroma of roast beef and Yorkshire pudding filling the air. We exchanged modest gifts, sang carols by the flickering fireplace, and made an unspoken pact to steer clear of any mention of Jason or Rebecca. For a few precious hours, we carved out a fragile bubble of normalcy, a sanctuary of warmth amidst the storm. As I washed dishes afterward, Megan lingered to help, her quiet presence a comfort. "This is nice," she said softly, her hands busy with a soapy plate. "Different, but nice." I glanced at her, struck by how relaxed she seemed, free from the performative tension that had often marked her during past holidays under Rebecca's watchful eye. "Different can be good," I replied, passing her a plate to dry. She nodded, her movements deliberate as she wiped the china, then paused, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever face consequences? Mom and Jason, I mean." The question caught me off guard. Megan had always sidestepped a talk of her mother and brother, focusing instead on her studies and dreams for the future. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "The bank might press charges for the forgery, or they might not if Jason withdraws the application. But there'll be consequences either way. Maybe not legal ones, but something deeper." Megan's gaze drifted, her expression pensive. "It's strange," she said. "Growing up, Mom always preached about family loyalty, about keeping our problems private, but now she's blasting all this family drama online, trying to make you and Grandpa look like the bad guys." The observation hung between us, heavy with the weight of her disillusionment. "People sometimes hold themselves to different standards than they expect from others," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm starting to see that," she replied, setting down the towel and turning to face me. "The thing is, Grandma, I always thought Mom and Jason had all the answers. They were so sure of themselves, so confident. It never crossed my mind that they could be wrong." Her words pierced me, revealing the suffocating dynamic of Rebecca's household, a place where certainty was a currency more valued than curiosity, where confidence drowned out doubt. No wonder Megan had struggled to find her own voice, to carve out a space for her own thoughts. "Recognizing that the people we love can be wrong is part of growing up," I said softly. "It doesn't mean you stop loving them. It just means you see them for who they are." She nodded, her eyes distant but resolute. "I still love them," she said, "but I don't want to be like them anymore." Those words echoed in my mind long after the dishes were done. The guests had left, and the house settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm. As Harold and I sat by the dying embers of the fire, too restless to sleep, I shared Megan's words with him. He turned his wedding band absently, a habit that surfaced when he was lost in thought, his brow furrowed. That's a big realization for someone her age, he said after a moment. Most people take years to figure out they don't have to become their parents. She's changing. I nodded, warmth spreading through me despite the ache of the day. I see it every time she visits. She's more thoughtful, more herself. Education's been good for her. Not just the classes, but the chance to find her own way. We sat in silence, the crackle of the fire fading into the background. After a while, Harold spoke again, his voice softer, tinged with a mix of resolve and sorrow. I've been thinking about our education fund policy, Margaret. It's working, isn't it? Not just in terms of money, but as a principle. Emma and Ben are thriving, and Megan, she's found something she's passionate about, something that's shaping her into someone stronger. I nodded, following his train of thought. And Jason, he continued, his voice heavy, maybe our boundaries kept him from taking on real debt he wasn't ready for. That loan would have been a disaster. If he's not ready for a legitimate bank loan, he's nowhere near ready to run a business. I agreed, though the thought brought little comfort. Harold sighed, his expression a blend of sadness and conviction. We made the right choice, even if it hurts. That's worth holding on to as we face what's coming. The difficult days arrived swiftly. 2 days after Christmas, we learned Jason had withdrawn his fraudulent loan application, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. The bank, relieved that no money had changed hands, opted not to press charges but flagged his name for future scrutiny. It was a small reprieve, no court appearances, no drawn-out legal battle, but it did nothing to mend the deeper fracture. Jason had tried to exploit our names for his own gain. Rebecca had stood by him, twisting the narrative to cast us as the villains. Neither had offered an apology or shown a shred of remorse. Our attorney's advice was a bitter pill: keep meticulous records of every interaction with Rebecca and Jason, as their behavior suggested they might try another financial maneuver. The idea of documenting conversations with my own daughter and grandson, treating them like potential adversaries, felt like a betrayal of everything I'd believed family could be. It was a heartbreak I hadn't anticipated, one that left me questioning how we'd come to this. As the new year dawned, a blanket of snow draped lakeside, turning our town into a shimmering winter tableau. Harold and I took to walking along the frozen lake shore, the crisp air and dazzling ice formations offering a brief escape from the weight of family tensions. Life began to find a new rhythm, different from the retirement we'd envisioned, but not without its own quiet joys. Harold resumed his woodworking classes at the community center, his hands steady as he shaped raw wood into something beautiful. I returned to my literacy volunteer work at the library, finding solace in helping others discover the power of words. Our Friday night dinners with friends at the hearth became a cherished ritual, a reminder that connection and community still held meaning. Emma and Ben went back to their universities after the holiday break, but their regular calls kept us tethered to their lives, their voices bright with updates about classes and dreams. Megan became a weekly presence, stopping by with assignments for me to review or questions about classroom management. Drawing on my years as a principal, her visits were a bright spot, each one revealing a young woman growing more confident, more grounded in her own path. January brought unexpected news from Michael. Over a celebratory dinner at our house, he shared that Claire had been offered a promotion to Director of Nursing at Memorial Hospital. The role was a perfect blend of her clinical expertise and her need for less physically demanding work after her surgery. Claire's eyes sparkled with excitement as she described the opportunity. "I start training with the outgoing director next month," she said, her voice alive with anticipation. "It's a new chapter for me." Michael grinned, pride evident in his expression. "And speaking of new chapters," he added, "we've been talking about moving." The word hit me like a jolt. "Moving on?" I echoed, my heart catching at the thought of them leaving Lakeside, of another shift in the fragile balance we'd found. For decades, Michael and Claire had called the same unassuming house their home, a place steeped in the quiet comfort of their early years together. It was a modest space filled with the echoes of laughter, late-night conversations, and the gentle wear of a life well lived. Michael, now in his late 50s, sat at their worn kitchen table, his brow furrowed with a mix of hope and hesitation as he looked at his wife Claire. Her once vibrant energy had been tempered by a recent illness, and though she was on the mend, the road to recovery was long. The couple had been dreaming of a fresh start, a new home designed to ease Claire's healing and provide a haven for their eventual retirement. Their gaze had settled on a corner lot of Harold and Margaret's lakefront property, a picturesque slice of land that seemed to hold endless possibilities. "We're thinking of building something new," Michael said, his voice steady but laced with vulnerability as he met Harold's eyes. "Something that works better for Claire, for her recovery, and for the years ahead. That corner lot on your property, it's perfect." Harold and Margaret exchanged a glance, their years of marriage allowing them to communicate volumes in a single look. Their lakefront property was their pride, a sprawling expanse of wooded acres with a stunning elevated corner that boasted panoramic views of the shimmering lake. They had long imagined it as an ideal spot for a dream home, though they'd never acted on the thought. Harold's tone was measured, betraying none of the surprise he felt. "You want to build on our land?" he asked, his words hanging in the air like a delicate thread. Claire, ever the peacemaker, leaned forward, her eyes bright with sincerity despite the fatigue that lingered in her frame. "Only if you're open to it," she said quickly. "We'd purchase the parcel legally, of course, at market value. But the idea of being close to you both as we all grow older, it feels right." Her voice carried a quiet longing, not just for a new home, but for the closeness of family, a tether to the people who mattered most as the years stretched on. The notion of Michael and Claire as neighbors sparked an immediate warmth in Margaret's heart. As she and Harold navigated their 70s, the practical advantages of having family nearby were undeniable. Someone to share the burdens of aging, to laugh with over morning coffee, to lean on in times of need. But beneath the appeal lay a tangle of complications. Margaret's thoughts drifted to their daughter Rebecca, whose strained relationship with the family cast a long shadow. "What about Rebecca?" Margaret asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking her daughter's name might summon the storm that seemed to follow her. Michael sighed, his jaw tightening. "Mom, you can't let Rebecca's perspective dictate your decisions. She'll twist this into favoritism no matter what you do. She always does." His words were blunt, born of years of navigating his sister's grievances. Claire reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "This would be a straightforward transaction," she added, her tone soothing. "We'd pay fair market value. It's not about taking anything away from anyone." Margaret nodded, though her mind was already racing. She and Harold promised to consider the proposal. But privately, Margaret's heart was already tilting toward yes. The vision of a new home rising on their cherished land, of Michael and Claire living just a stone's throw away, of their grandchildren's laughter echoing across the lake. It felt like the legacy she and Harold had always dreamed of. A multi-generational haven, rooted in love and shared history, seemed within reach. A week later, an unexpected call shattered the quiet rhythm of Margaret's day. The voice on the other end belonged to David, Rebecca's husband, a man who had always kept his distance from the family's conflicts. His tone was halting, tinged with discomfort. "Margaret, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," he began, clearing his throat. Curiosity stirred in Margaret's chest. "Not at all, David. How are you?" she replied, her voice warm but cautious. "Fine, fine," he said, though the words felt hollow. After a pause, he continued, "I'm calling about something off the record. Rebecca doesn't know I'm reaching out." Margaret's curiosity deepened, a flicker of unease settling in her stomach. "I'm listening," she said, bracing herself. "It's about Jason's studio," David said, his voice heavy with something like shame. "That whole loan application mess, it was Jason's idea. I had nothing to do with it. I was horrified when I found out." Margaret's mind reeled. Jason, Rebecca's son, had attempted to secure a loan using fraudulent means, a reckless act that had only widened the rift between the family. Was David trying to distance himself from the scandal? Seeking forgiveness? Or was this a tentative step toward mending what had been broken? "I appreciate you telling me," Margaret said carefully, her thoughts racing to piece together his intentions. David pressed on, his words tumbling out like a confession. "I've been trying to get Rebecca to see reason, but she's consumed by this idea that you and Harold promised to fund Jason's career and then backed out. Nothing I say gets through to her." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, raw. "I think Jason needs to grow up and stop expecting handouts. I think Rebecca's enabling him, and I think I've made it worse by giving them both everything they wanted for too long. Margaret's breath caught at the admission. David had always been the provider, showering his family with financial support while keeping his emotions at arm's length. To hear him acknowledge his role in the dysfunction was startling, a glimpse into a man grappling with regret. "That's insightful," she said, her tone gentle but guarded. "Yeah, well," David replied, exhaustion creeping into his voice. "2 decades of marriage counseling had to teach me something." Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "You and Rebecca are in counseling?" she asked, surprised. "On and off for years," he confirmed. "More off than on lately. Honestly, Margaret, I don't know if our marriage will survive this. She's become someone I barely recognize. Obsessed with this feud, spending money we don't have on lawyers and private investigators." "Private investigators?" Margaret repeated, alarm spiking through her. David sighed. "To dig into your finances. She's convinced you and Harold are hiding assets, offshore accounts, secret fortunes. It's insane. I've told her that's not who you are, but she won't listen." Margaret's mind spun. The situation was far worse than she'd imagined. Rebecca's anger had morphed into something darker, a fixation that bordered on paranoia. Hiring professionals to investigate her own parents was a betrayal that cut deep. "Why are you telling me this, David?" Margaret asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Because someone has to stop this before it destroys us all," he said, his tone fierce with desperation. "I've tried reasoning with her, cutting off the money. Nothing works. I thought if you knew how far this has gone, maybe you could, I don't know, reach out, find some compromise." Margaret's indignation flared. "We've tried reaching out," she said, her voice sharp. "We've invited her to family gatherings, kept the door open. She's chosen to escalate at every turn." I know," David said quickly, his tone pleading. "I'm not blaming you. I just don't know what else to do." The call ended, leaving Margaret sitting at her kitchen table, the weight of David's words pressing down on her. She stared at the familiar grain of the wood, her mind a storm of questions. How far would Rebecca take this crusade? What would happen when her investigators found nothing? No hidden wealth? No secret accounts? Would she accept reality, or would her suspicions find new targets? That evening, Margaret shared the conversation with Harold, watching as his face grew shadowed with worry. "Private investigator," he muttered, shaking his head, "as if we've been hoarding some secret fortune while driving our old Buick and working past retirement age." His voice was heavy with disbelief, tinged with a weariness that alarmed Margaret. "It shows how warped her view of us has become," she said softly. "We're not just disappointing parents to her. We're villains, scheming to cheat her." Harold ran a hand over his face, the lines of his 76 years etched deeper in that moment. "I'm tired, Margaret," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Tired of being painted as the enemy by my own daughter. Tired of tiptoeing around in our own community, wondering what new accusations she'll throw at us next." The defeat in his words shook Margaret. Harold had always been her anchor, unshakable through life's storms. To see him so worn down was a wound of its own. On impulse, Margaret reached for his hand. "Maybe we should get away for a while," she said, the idea taking shape as she spoke. "Take that Grand Canyon trip we've talked about for years. Give ourselves some breathing room from all this." Harold's eyes lit with a spark of interest. "You're serious?" he asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Absolutely," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "We're healthy. We've saved for it. Why not now when we need a change the most?" The idea blossomed into a plan, a 3-week road trip through the Southwest, weaving through national parks they dreamed of visiting. They would leave after Harold's woodworking class wrapped up in mid-February, returning in early March when Michigan's winter began to soften. "Let's do it," Harold said, his voice alive with a decisiveness Margaret hadn't heard in weeks. That night, they pored over maps, booked hotels, and ordered new camera gear, the anticipation of adventure breathing life into their weary spirits. When they shared their plans with Michael and Claire, the couple's enthusiasm was infectious. "It's about time you did something for yourselves," Claire said, her smile warm with approval. Their grandchildren, Emma and Ben, sent lists of must-see spots in Arizona from their high school robotics trip, while Megan, their youngest, offered to tend the houseplants and collect the mail. The preparations wove a thread of excitement through the family, a welcome reprieve from the tension that had lingered too long. As January's chills settled in, the trip became a beacon of hope. Margaret found herself smiling more, sleeping soundly, and feeling a flicker of optimism about the future. Harold, too, seemed renewed, spending hours in his workshop crafting wooden keepsake boxes for each grandchild. Even Jason, though they weren't sure when they might see him again. The act was a quiet gesture of love, a refusal to let the rift sever their bond entirely. February brought another surprise. Megan arrived for her usual Saturday visit, clutching an official-looking envelope, her face alight with a mix of excitement and nerves. "I got it," she announced, barely through the door. "The teaching fellowship I applied for. Only 10 students in the state were chosen, and I'm one of them." Her voice trembled with pride, and Margaret felt a surge of joy, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. The fellowship was a testament to Megan's hard work, a bright spot in a season of shadows, and a reminder of the family's resilience amid the storm. I threw my arms around Megan, my heart swelling with pride. "This is incredible," I said, pulling her close. "We need every single detail." We settled around the kitchen table, steaming mugs of coffee in hand, as Megan began to share her news. Her voice brimmed with excitement as she described a prestigious fellowship she'd earned, a program that would fully fund her final year of college and her teaching credential. In return, she'd commit to teaching in underserved schools for 3 years after graduation. "It covers everything," she said, her eyes sparkling like sunlight on water. "Tuition, books, even a stipend for living expenses. And the best part? I'll have mentorship from master teachers throughout the program." Her words painted a vivid picture of a dream coming true, and I could feel the weight of her joy, the culmination of years of hard work and quiet determination. "This is exactly what I've been working toward," she added, her voice soft but certain. Harold leaned forward, his warm smile radiating pride. "We're so proud of you, Megan. This is a huge accomplishment." Megan's cheeks flushed, and she dipped her head, still shy when it came to praise. I watched her, marveling at how she carried herself, humble yet resolute, a young woman stepping confidently into her future. But then her tone shifted, growing quieter, more guarded. "There's something else," she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I told Mom about it." My heart stuttered, a familiar unease creeping in. Megan's gaze dropped for a moment before she continued, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. "She said I was throwing my life away." The words hung heavy in the air, and I could see the hurt flickering behind Megan's composed expression. Like a storm cloud passing over a clear schema, she called teaching a dead-end career for people with no ambition. Said I'd regret locking myself into 3 years at some ghetto school, as she put it. Harold's face darkened, his jaw tightening, but Megan pressed on before he could interject. "But here's the thing," she said, sitting up straighter, her shoulders squared with a quiet defiance. 5 years ago, those words would have crushed me. I would have turned down the fellowship just to avoid disappointing her. But now, Yasho..." She paused, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw a strength there that hadn't existed before. I felt sad for her, but her opinion did not sway me, not even a little. My chest tightened with a mix of awe and relief. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin and the steady pulse of her resolve. "That's true independence, Megan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Not just financial, but emotional. That's powerful." She nodded, a small smile breaking through. "It feels amazing," she admitted. "Scary, but amazing." To celebrate, we decided on a spontaneous dinner at the Blue Moon Diner, a cozy spot in the heart of Lakeside where the glow of neon signs and the clink of dishes created a comforting backdrop. Word of Megan's fellowship had already spread through our small town, and Mrs. Patel, the diner's owner, beamed as she brought Megan a complimentary slice of apple pie. "For our future teacher," she said warmly, her pride echoing our own. Megan blushed but accepted the gesture with grace, and I couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude for this community that cheered her on. As we drove home later, with Megan in the back seat since she'd walked over earlier, the car was quiet, the hum of the engine blending with the soft rhythm of our thoughts. Then Megan's voice broke the silence, tentative but searching. Do you think Mom will ever come around about my teaching career? I glanced at Harold, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights, before answering carefully. I hope so, sweetheart. Sometimes people need time to adjust when their expectations don't line up with reality. Your mother had a very specific vision for your future, and it's hard for her to let go of that. But it's my future, not hers, Megan said, a thread of frustration weaving through her words. Exactly, Harold said, his voice firm but kind. And you're claiming it beautifully. I nodded, my mind drifting to the deeper currents of this family rift. Rebecca, Megan's mother, saw her children differently than I did mine. For me, supporting Michael and Megan meant cheering them on as they carved their own paths, even when those paths diverged from what I might have imagined. But for Rebecca, Jason and Megan seemed to be extensions of herself, their choices a direct measure of her own success or failure. Megan's decision to pursue teaching wasn't just a career choice in Rebecca's eyes. It was a rebellion, a betrayal of the polished, high-achieving future she'd envisioned. This insight didn't excuse Rebecca's harsh words, but it helped me understand the pain and fear driving her reaction. True reconciliation, I realized, would require more than smoothing over this one conflict. It would demand a fundamental shift in how Rebecca viewed her role as a mother, a shift I wasn't sure she was ready to make. Our road trip plans continued to take shape, a bright spot amid the family tension. Harold and I pored over maps, reserving rooms at charming lodges and historic hotels along our route. We studied trail guides for the hikes we'd take, imagining the crisp air and sweeping vistas of the mountains. New hiking boots sat by the door, broken in with long walks around the frozen lake, their soles crunching against the snow. Harold spent hours tinkering with the car, checking every detail to ensure it was ready for the journey. The anticipation of the trip filled our home with a quiet excitement, a reminder that life could still hold adventure, even in the midst of uncertainty. But a week before we were set to leave, Megan called with news that stopped my heart. Jason's in the hospital, she said, her voice flat, devoid of preamble. Alcohol poisoning. They had to pump his stomach. I sank onto the nearest chair, my mind racing. Is he going to be okay? I asked, gripping the phone. They think so, she replied. He was at some industry party, trying to network with music producers, got blackout drunk, and passed out in the bathroom. His friends called an ambulance. Does your mother know? I asked, already picturing Rebecca's reaction. Yes, Megan said. She and Dad are with him now. She's not handling it well, blaming the venue for serving too much alcohol, his friends for not watching him, the hospital for not treating him like some kind of VIP. I closed my eyes, the scene unfolding all too vividly in my mind. Rebecca's anger, her refusal to see Jason's role in his own crisis. And you? I asked gently. How are you holding up? Megan sighed, the sound heavy with worry. I'm scared for him. He's been spiraling for months, drinking too much, missing meetings, burning through money. I've tried talking to him, but he either brushes me off or goes on a rant about how you and Grandpa ruined his life by not funding his music studio. The accusation stung, though it wasn't new. I pushed past the hurt, focusing on Megan. Is there anything we can do? I asked. I don't think so, she said, her voice tinged with resignation. Mom would see it as interference. I just thought you should know. After we hung up, I shared the news with Harold, who listened with a troubled frown. Poor kid, he murmured. He's been heading for this for a long time. I hesitated, then asked, should we cancel the trip? Harold shook his head, his expression resolute. We can't put our lives on hold waiting for them to sort this out. Rebecca's made it clear she doesn't want us involved. The best we can do is keep living our lives and leave the door open for when, or if, they're ready to walk through it. He was right, but it felt strange to pack for a vacation while Jason was in crisis. Still, boundaries work both ways, and Rebecca and Jason had chosen to keep us at a distance, even now. The day before our departure, I received a text from an unknown number. This is David. Jason's being released tomorrow. Going to stay with us for a while. Thought you should know. David, Rebecca's husband, had always been kinder, more open than Rebecca. I wasn't sure how to respond. Would he welcome questions, or was this just a courtesy? After some thought, I sent back, thank you for letting us know. Wishing him a good recovery. David's reply came quickly. Margaret, I know this isn't my place, but I think Jason needs help beyond what Rebecca and I can give him. If you have any suggestions for treatment programs, I'd appreciate it. Not that I can guarantee she'll listen. His words touch me, a small bridge across the chasm of our family divide. I'll send some information, I promised. And David, thank you for looking out for him. And that evening, Harold and I researched residential treatment programs for young adults struggling with substance abuse, focusing on those that incorporated creative arts therapy, hoping something might resonate with Jason's passion for music. I compiled a list with notes on their approaches and success rates and emailed it to David. His response was brief but sincere. Thank you. Safe travels. The exchange left me with a tangle of emotions as we finished packing. David's willingness to reach out was a glimmer of hope, but Rebecca's influence loomed large, and I knew she might dismiss any suggestion of treatment. Still, a seed had been planted, and I clung to the possibility that this crisis might be a turning point for Jason and Rebecca, a chance to confront the patterns that were pulling them under. The morning of our departure dawned crisp and clear, the sunrise casting a soft glow over the frozen lake, painting it in hues of pink and gold. We loaded the car with suitcases and supplies, double-checked the appliances, and set the thermostat to its vacation mode. Michael and Claire stopped by to pick up the spare key and go over the house-sitting instructions one last time. Emma had sent a care package of road trip snacks and audiobooks, which sat waiting on the passenger seat. Ben had crafted a custom playlist, each track labeled for different stretches of our journey. Mountain passes, desert sunsets, canyon echoes. As we prepared to pull out of the driveway, I noticed Harold glancing back at the house, his expression unreadable. I reached for his hand, knowing we were both carrying the weight of the family we were leaving behind, but also the promise of the road ahead. We were moving forward, not because we didn't care, but because we had to trust that love, like a seed in winter, could wait for the right moment to grow. Our return to Lakeside came with the first whispers of spring, patches of bare earth peeking through melting snowdrifts, a softness in the air hinting at warmer days. The 3 weeks away had restored us in ways I hadn't expected. Beyond the breathtaking vistas of canyons and plains, the journey had given us clarity, a reminder that our world stretched far beyond the confines of family conflict. We arrived home to find our lake house waiting like an old friend, its familiar walls warmed by small gestures from those we loved. Claire had left fresh flowers on the kitchen table, their vibrant petals a burst of welcome. A lasagna, still warm, sat in the refrigerator, her thoughtful gift to ease our return. Michael had neatly stacked our mail on Harold's desk, each envelope a quiet proof of his care. Emma's care package waited nearby, filled with her homemade granola and soothing herbal teas, a gentle bridge back to everyday life. That evening, as we unpacked and settled in, the phone rang. Megan's voice bubbled through, warm with excitement as she welcomed us home. We swapped stories of our travels, her laughter lifting my spirits. "How's Jason?" I asked, bracing myself for the answer. "Better, I think," she said cautiously. "He's still staying with Mom and Dad, but he's started group therapy at the community health center. David's been taking him." My heart lifted at this unexpected news. "Your father convinced him?" I asked, picturing David's quiet strength. "It was more complicated than that," Megan admitted. "After Jason got out of the hospital, he had a meltdown, smashed things in his old room, said some awful things to Mom. Dad finally drew a line. Either Jason gets help or he can't stay." I tried to imagine David standing firm against both Rebecca and Jason, a rare act of resolve that must have cost him. "How did your mother take it?" I asked. "Not well at first," Megan said. "She was furious, accused Dad of abandoning Jason when he needed support. But when Jason started improving after a few sessions, she eased up. We talked longer, Megan sharing updates about her teaching fellowship and her plans for spring break. Just before we hung up, she added, "Oh, Mom knows you're back. She drove by earlier and saw your car." The news didn't surprise me. Rebecca had always kept close tabs on us, but it sent a ripple of unease through me, Bum. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, steeling myself for whatever might come next. The next morning dawned bright, the sun warm enough to melt the last snow on our deck. Harold and I took our coffee outside, savoring the spring light as we planned our garden. "Let's expand the vegetable plot this year," Harold suggested, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. More tomato varieties. Maybe those purple carrots Emma loves. I smiled, warmed by his renewed energy. The road trip had washed away the weariness that had clung to him during months of family tension, leaving him vibrant and hopeful. Our quiet morning was interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. We looked up to see Rebecca's silver Lexus creeping up the driveway, its slow approach heavy with unspoken intent. Harold and I exchanged a glance, silently bracing ourselves. Given the past year's conflicts, harsh words, accusations, and painful distance, the possibilities ranged from another confrontation to perhaps a tentative olive branch. The car stopped and Rebecca stepped out alone. She paused by her vehicle, her posture hesitant, as if gathering the courage to face us. As she approached the deck, I noticed how the year had worn on her. She was thinner, her face etched with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes poorly masked by makeup. Her usually flawless hair hung limp, strands escaping their careful arrangement. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in years, stripped of its usual edge. "Can we talk?" Harold gestured to an empty chair. "Of course. Coffee?" She nodded, and I slipped inside to pour a cup, grateful for a moment to steady my racing heart. When I returned, Rebecca sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the mug I placed before her. "I heard you were away," she said. "Megan mentioned you took a trip west." "We did," Harold said, his tone even. "Grand Canyon, Bryce, Zion, places we've always wanted to see." Rebecca nodded, her gaze still on the coffee. "That's good. I'm glad you had that chance." Silence fell, heavy with the weight of unspoken words, broken only by the chirping of birds and the faint hum of a boat on the lake. Then Rebecca took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I owe you an apology. My behavior this past year, it's been unforgivable." I kept my face neutral, not wanting to disrupt what felt like a fragile attempt at amends. "The things I said, the accusations, those social media posts," she continued, shaking her head. "I was so sure I was right that you were unfair to Jason. My anger blinded me." "What changed?" Harold asked, his voice gentle but probing. Rebecca's composure wavered, her eyes glistening. "Jason's hospitalization was a wake-up call. Then his meltdown afterward, the things he said to me." She faltered, struggling to hold herself together. "It forced me to rethink everything." I waited, sensing she wasn't finished. After a moment, she continued. "David and I have been in couples counseling. It's been eye-opening, especially about how my choices as a parent have shaped Jason and Megan." She took a small sip of coffee, then met our eyes for the first time. "The forgery was my idea. Not the act itself, Jason did that alone. But I planted the seed. I was convinced you were withholding money that should have been ours." The confession hung between us, raw and heavy, its weight sinking into the quiet morning. It wasn't just an admission of fault, but a revelation of intent that carried consequences we'd all felt. "Why tell us now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Rebecca's voice trembled with a mix of resolve and vulnerability as she spoke, her words carrying the weight of a truth she'd long avoided. "I have to be honest if there's any chance of mending what's broken between us," she said, her eyes searching ours for a flicker of understanding. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her scarf, betraying the nervous energy beneath her composed exterior. "And it's not just about us. I'm trying to show Jason what accountability looks like. How can I expect him to own up to his mistakes if I can't face mine?" The sincerity in her voice struck me like a chord, resonating with a maturity I hadn't expected from my daughter. For years, her choices had driven a wedge between us, but in that moment, a spark of cautious hope ignited within me. Her words weren't just an apology, they were a bridge, fragile but real, extended across the chasm of our fractured family. Rebecca's gaze dropped to the floor, as if the weight of her confession was too heavy to meet our eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she continued, her voice softer now, threaded with regret. "What I did, what we did, betrayed your trust in ways I can't undo. I see that now, and I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air, raw and unadorned, and I felt a pang in my chest, a mix of pain and pride. Pain for the years of distance, for the trust that had been shattered. Pride for the courage it took her to stand here, owning her mistakes. Harold's hand reached for mine, his touch a silent question, a shared moment of wondering whether this was real. I gave a slight nod, acknowledging the unspoken thought between us. This felt like a genuine attempt at reconciliation, however late it had come. Harold's voice was steady, warm with cautious gratitude. Thank you, Rebecca. Hearing you say that means more than you know. At his words, I saw her shoulders relax, the tension easing from her frame as if she'd been holding her breath for years. She offered a small, tentative smile, then took a deep breath as if steeling herself for what came next. There's something else you should know, she said. Jason's in a residential treatment program now for his substance abuse and mental health struggles. He'll be there for at least 90 days. Her eyes flickered with a mix of relief and lingering worry, the kind only a mother could carry. I felt a surge of hope, tempered by the knowledge of how hard that road could be. That's a brave step, I said gently. Is he open to it? Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line and she nodded slowly. He is now. At first he fought it with everything he had, blamed me, David, his friends, you both, even the music industry. He was so angry, so lost. But after his breakdown, something shifted. I think he finally saw the dead end he was racing toward. Her voice cracked slightly, and I could sense the weight of those months, the sleepless nights spent worrying about her son, the guilt of wondering where she'd gone wrong. Harold leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. And you, Rebecca? How are you holding up through all this? Her smile was bittersweet, tinged with the kind of sadness that comes from hard-won self-awareness. One day at a time, she said, echoing the mantra of Jason's program. I'm learning a lot about myself, about how my need to be the perfect mother, to have perfect children, led me to make some terrible choices. I enabled him, thinking I was helping. I see that now. She paused, her eyes distant, as if sifting through memories she wasn't ready to share. I've also been talking to Megan more, she added, her voice softening. Really listening, maybe for the first time. She's incredible, you know, the way she's carved out her own path, even when I didn't approve. There was a quiet awe in her tone, a recognition of the daughter she'd overlooked for too long. I felt a swell of pride for Megan, who had grown so much despite the challenges. She is incredible, I agreed, my heart warming at the thought of her resilience. She's come into her own this past year. Rebecca nodded, her expression wistful, as if she were seeing Megan clearly for the first time. I want to rebuild things with her, she said, and with both of you, if you'll let me. Harold's voice was gentle but firm, a quiet reassurance. We've always wanted that, Rebecca. The door's never been closed. Her eyes glistened and she swallowed hard. I know, she said. Even when I was at my worst, spreading rumors, making accusations, you never fought back the way I did. That meant something, even if I couldn't admit it then. Now, the admission hung between us, a fragile thread of honesty weaving us closer together. We talked for another hour, navigating the delicate terrain of reconciliation with care. Rebecca shared more about Jason's treatment, her own counseling with David, and the tentative steps she was taking to rebuild trust with Megan. We listened, asked questions, and offered encouragement, careful not to push too hard or expect too much. As she stood to leave, pausing on the steps of our deck, Rebecca turned back, her expression vulnerable. I've withdrawn all the complaints I filed, she said, her voice steady but soft. The private investigators, the legal inquiries about your estate, all of it. And I'm working on public apologies to set the record straight about the rumors I spread. I felt a wave of relief mingled with gratitude for her effort to make amends. We appreciate that, I said sincerely. She nodded, then hesitated, as if gathering courage. Would it be okay if I called you once a week, just to talk? Harold's smile was warm, his voice full of quiet hope. We'd like that very much. We watched her drive away, the hum of her car fading into the distance, leaving a heavy silence between us. Well, Harold said at last, that was unexpected. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. Yes, but not entirely surprising. Rebecca's always had the capacity for growth, even if it takes her a while to get there. Harold's eyes met mine, reflecting the weariness of months spent navigating conflict. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked. I sighed, honest in my uncertainty. "I don't know, but I'm willing to find out." In the weeks that followed, Rebecca stayed true to her word. Her weekly calls became a ritual, each one a careful step toward rebuilding trust. She joined us for Sunday dinner at Michael and Claire's, her presence tentative but earnest as she worked to mend ties with her brother's family. When Emma came home for a weekend visit, Rebecca made a point to connect with her, asking thoughtful questions about medical school and listening with genuine interest. I watched, heart full, as my daughter took these small but meaningful steps. Jason's progress was slower, more uncertain. From his treatment facility, he sent a brief handwritten note. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement memo of the pain he'd caused. It was a small gesture, but for someone who had been so lost, it felt like a seed of progress. As spring bloomed across Lakeside, Harold and I finalized the sale of the corner lot to Michael and Claire. The process was open and transparent, with Rebecca kept in the loop at every step. To our relief, she supported the plan, even offering design ideas tailored to Claire's post-surgery needs. Megan, meanwhile, continued to thrive in her education program, her confidence growing with every classroom success. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about her students, their quirks and triumphs lighting up her world. Teaching was more than a job for her. It was a calling, and watching her embrace it filled me with a deep, quiet joy. By early May, as construction began on Michael and Claire's new home, our family had settled into a fragile but hopeful new rhythm. The wounds hadn't fully healed, and perhaps they never would. But the active conflict had faded, replaced by a cautious rebuilding of bonds. One sunny afternoon, as Harold and I walked the property line with the construction supervisor, discussing drainage for the new foundation, I found myself reflecting on the past year. We had weathered a storm that could have torn us apart, yet we'd held fast to our values while keeping our hearts open to reconciliation. We discovered reserves of strength we didn't know we had, both as individuals and as a couple. Most importantly, we'd reaffirmed what mattered most. Not wealth or control, but authentic connection built on respect and care. The grandchildren, once distant and transactional, were growing into adults capable of deeper relationships. Emma and Ben moved forward with purpose and integrity, their paths steady and true. Megan had found her voice and her vocation, her passion, a beacon of hope. Even Jason, in the structured confines of his treatment program, was showing glimmers of self-awareness and responsibility. As I watched the excavator break ground for Michael and Claire's home, a sense of rightness settled over me. This was the legacy Harold and I had always hoped to leave. Not just financial support, but a living example of resilience, growth, and principled generosity. Money couldn't buy the kind of growth our family had found through this challenging chapter. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is the space to stumble, learn, and build something stronger from the lessons.